Peace, family. We come to talk to the family today about the inner cities across America, the big cities, some of the small cities, and how ghettos were created. Peace to everybody in the chat room for the people that's coming in. We're gonna try to go in and we're gonna cover how how our people got to the state that they're in today and explain to them. I always explain that we're under the system of capitalism, and under the system of capitalism, somebody has to be the consumers. We're going to try to demonstrate how the Negro was sentenced to a lifetime of consumption in 1875 when the North decided to pull the troops out of the South from protecting our amendment rights, where we would be able to build cities and do for self. These things have a lasting effect. What happened 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 30 years, 40 years ago, 30 years ago is still affecting you today economically, because our people was not able to pass down generational wealth. You had federal laws, state laws, and city laws, and all these laws didn't go together or wasn't able to protect you under certain amendments. The Northerners and the Southerners was always fighting as to how to deal with the Negroes. So certain decisions or provisions wasn't made to protect the Negro because of this argument that the Northerners and the Southerners were having. So I think a lot of times we see the effect of the cause. We see the ghetto today. We see the conditions of our people, and we judge on what we see today. But we also, but by doing that, we don't understand the systematic oppression that happened to our people after slavery, from redlining to anti-lynching bills not being passed, having to get so many different civil rights bills passed. There was just so many things that our people had to go through that affects us today. It's kind of like I'm in my 40s and I have children, grown children, and an 11-year-old, and I raised them up. I was responsible. I was responsible for my children. I raised them up. They're a reflection of me. Our people before us, when they were marching, getting dogs sick on them, water hoses, being, like I said, being redlined into cities, like unfair housing. We had they had job discriminations. We had to get civil rights bills passed for that. That kept us out of being able to pass down generational wealth or being able to be in ownership of anything in order to compete. Our ancestors wasn't stupid. They wanted to compete in the system of capitalism, but we was forced to be in the system of consumption. So it's easy to see, look at these dysfunctional niggas that they killing each other. They going crazy. They doing this. But any group that you see that's forced under economic deprivation, they're going to have violence. Study the early industrial period. Study what the Carnegie Foundation and Henry Ford and J.P. Morgan and how they treated white folks, making them work long hours, making the children work. Up in 1916, they passed the Children's Act, where children weren't permitted under the age of 12 to work long hours. I mean, the Industrial Act, it was crazy. Irish was killing each other. Irish gangs, Jews was killing each other. They had revolutions here in America. You got to study the early America, from about 1890 to about 1937. It was anarchy in America. The black man was always at the bottom, but you had the Irish, you had the Polacks, and all of them was fighting for certain positions to be treated right by these elite corporations and big government. So just because you see black people in a position that you see them in today, you have to look at history. Any group that's forced through economic deprivation, is going to be violent. And then the difference between us and those groups, they still had intact language and intact cultures. We've been stripped of all of those things. And again, we've been sentenced to a lifetime of consumerism. So I'll let my brother Moses come in and speak before we start the show and go in. Moses, you want to come in and say something?
Peace, man. Looking forward to a good build. Thanks for having me on, big bro.
Yeah. That's it.
That's it, man. I'm ready to get into it, man. The topic is so relevant. I'll be a little longer. The topic is so relevant right now because we have a lot of a discussion going on about issues that are kind of I guess the adjacencies or the underlying premise of about the different personalities and characters, and it's almost to the point of being entertainment rather than edutainment. And so, you know, I'm a firm believer that we can have fun, we can joke, we can roast each other, we can come onto this space, but we have to find our balance. And as we continue to build with one another and on different platforms, and find the brothers who are really about the work of the business and the work of the future, and laying that groundwork, as we continue to reach out and connect with them, we also have to continue to edify each other with builds like this one that bring a little bit of history, a whole lot of passion, and leave it on the table for the next generation and for the current generation to consume. So I'm just ready to get into it, man. This is dear to my heart. Let's do it.
All right, let's share the screen. Let's get into it. Oh man. All right, we're gonna start off. We're gonna get into. I actually did something like this about 10 months to a year ago. Before I had a little following that I got now, and I discussed this, and I broke down what the federal government did as our people was running from the South to the North, fleeing oppression and tyranny and terror that they was experiencing in the South, because FDR refused to pass the anti-lynching law. So blacks were being lynched all through the South. Once the troops was pulled out, our cities were being burned. And when we ran to the North was also complicit in redlining us. And so we're going to show basically how both these parties, the Republican and the Democratic Party, was complicit in the destruction of black people. So when you hear black people say, "Oh my God, well they always these liberals this and these liberals that," and I'm saying, well, wait a minute. Do you ever stop and ask yourself a question why the black community, just the 90% of the black community just fell over to the Democratic Party? What type of betrayal or what happened with the Republican Party that made black folks fall to the Democratic Party? Nobody ever asked that. We just let people get away with saying these liberal talk, this liberal talk. Well, we're gonna break that down today, and we're gonna bring some understanding to what happened. So the federal government created inner city ghettos with racist housing regulations, legalized discrimination through redlining was still very much allowed by the summer of 1967, and we're still affected by this today. So from Detroit to Atlanta, Newark to Cambridge, conditions in American ghettos were largely the same, even when neighborhoods that housed them differently. But ghettos didn't just happen by accident. They were primarily in cities of the Northeast and Midwest, and formed during the first half of the 20th century. The formation came as a direct result of especially racist government policies, economic and labor factors that drastically disadvantaged black workers, and actually racial violence that made it impossible for blacks to live in other neighborhoods. Now, as we begin to hear this is what's going on up north now, Northeast and Midwest. After we fled the South, the so-called Republican thought process of people that was so-called supposed to be against slavery, they hated you just as much as the Southerners did. We experienced just as much racism in Philadelphia and Chicago and Detroit as we did in the South. But this is something that's not widely talked about. These factors created many conditions for the urban uprisings of the 60s. Putting it simply, American ghetto exists almost entirely as a result of intentional state action and extra legal white supremacist violence. In the first half of the 20th century, the black population went from mostly rural southern population to urban northern one. In 1900, about 90% of the black population lived in the South, with a majority in rural areas. By 1970, however, about 70% lived in cities. Majority in the North. A complicated set of factors created what became known as the Great Migration. But a fundamental force was the fact that white laborers in the North were unionizing. To cut costs, factory owners began to actively recruit black male laborers from the South. Now, they would recruit black male laborers from the South because they would work for cheaper. Now, remember, I told you up north, you had already had fighting and protests, You had fighting and protests in steel mills, fighting and protests on the railroads, on the Carnegie railroads. I mean, people were dying. Children were being forced to work. Now you have the influx of the African Americans coming from the South up to the North. So now there's a bigger problem because these people are working long hours and not enough pay. It was, I mean, these big business, these Rockefellers and J.P. Morgans and the Carnegies was just taking advantage of white folks. So you already know how they view Negroes as they was coming up. So to cut costs, factory owners began to actively recruit black male laborers from the South. They knew they could pay these men lower wages than their white counterparts and could also benefit and could also be confident that their hiring of black men was unlikely a result of interracial working class resistance for the overall lowering of wages. In the early 1920s, a eugenics movement, belief in natural biological difference between race groups was on the rise. The dominant view of American race science was one of extinction. The idea that through complete racial segregation, the lesser races would simply die off. Separation was not only the law; it was considered by many whites to be moral and just and a just thing to do about race relations. Unions at this time were racially exclusive and had shown a commitment to this type of organizing and maintenance of the color line. Most white laborers were simply too racist to ever effectively join black people to fight together for better working conditions. Listen to this shit. They were already fighting for their life before the blacks even came to the North. But they were so racist in the North. We ain't talking about the South no more now. We're talking about up north. We're talking about Cleveland. We're talking about Philadelphia. We're talking about Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, Camden, New Jersey, where Campbell's Soup and all these different places. These people were so racist. They would rather stay in economic deprivation rather than working with black people, unifying with Negroes to create better working conditions and wages. This is early America. This is the image here of some of these white folks today that you guys are friends with. This is let's see. Stick with the term. It's all the same thing, Donald Will. Don't even matter. It's all the same thing. Yeah, this is the image of some of your white friends today. This is their grandparents. Let's not get it twisted. Little Rexy and Cody and Becky and Jen and Caitlin. This is their grandparents. This is their grandparents today, and this stuff still exists within the families. Segregation unions weren't the only problem for black migrants. As they arrived north in greater numbers, they were met with severe racial violence in neighborhoods and at work, given the dominant white supremacist view that simply touching a black body could ultimately lead to disease. Whites fiercely defended their property and neighborhood. This was because of the Eugenics Society. We're going to do a video on the Eugenics Society as well. Neighborhood boundaries became racial boundaries. We tend to think of race war as a black invention embodied in riots and unrest in the 1960s, but in the early 20th century, it was more frequent. It was more frequent whites in the North who were violently defending turf along racial lines. So our grandparents fled the South because they were being terrorized and tormented and not being protected by the federal government. They came up north and experienced the same bullshit. Racial residential segregation rose to levels never seen before in the United States, doubling between 1880 and 1940, with most of that growth focused in cities. The ghetto was forming in order to resolve two crises. First was the crisis of the white mind, and blackness was thought to be a threat and in need of control. The second was a crisis of capital, as rising wages for white males were perceived by factory owners as a threat for profitability. This put black laborers in an impossible position. They were confined to the worst neighborhoods while also earning significantly less money than their white counterparts. white violence and unequal economic conditions were not the only factors. Specific racist government policies made it much easier to maintain the color line. Racial exclusions were written into property deeds, allowing homeowners to ensure their property would be sold to other whites for a set period of time, typically over many decades. Now, y'all need to understand how important that is. See, because when we talk about how our people got in the positions that they're in now, and we talk about this ADOS thing, the United States government, the federal government was complicit in our economic deprivation. They allowed states and cities to create racist laws to keep wealth being passed down generationally to whites, as opposed to the blacks that was migrating up north for a better life, to be able to compete. They kept us out of the loop of competing. Okay, allowing homeowners to ensure their property would be sold to other whites for a set period of time, typically over many decades. The Supreme Court declared these racially restrictive covenants illegal in 1948, but it started early on. But in many locales, the practice continued unabated due to the exceedingly lax enforcement at the municipal level. Come on, man. The 1964 Civil Rights Act was intended to address these issues once and for all, but was effectively hamstrung by Southern Democrats, a powerful voting bloc that watered down any civil rights policy coming out of Congress. And without Southern voters, the Democratic Party had little chance of winning the White House. The Democratic coalition that essentially dominated national politics from Franklin D. Roosevelt to Lyndon B. Johnson relied on placating racists in order to rule. Come on, man. Come on, listen to this shit. The federally backed home loan programs were the other primary way in which the state effectively fostered segregation, starting in the 1930s and continuing for several decades. The federal government underwrote home loans that created mass suburbanation and a dramatic rise in home ownership rates. But these loans were not distributed fairly. The Federal Homeowners Loan Corporation, created as part of the Roosevelt New Deal to distribute loans, made a series of residential security maps as a way of assessing risk-reward calculations for federal loans. Now look at this shit they did. Predictably, a key component to the assessment of the risk was race, both the race of the applicant as well as the racial composition of the neighborhood. Black neighborhoods were coded red on these maps, a practice that became known as redlining. The logic was to use government guaranteed funds to assist potential black homeowners was essentially too risky to bet a bet to take. Future government loans programs during the pre-civil rights era adopted this reasoning. Private lending and insurance companies soon followed suit. Blackness was now officially considered a financial risk. Come on, man. Moses, if you want to jump in at any time, you can jump right in, man, and ad-lib. So, private lending and insurance companies followed suit. Blackness was now officially considered a financial risk. Its mere presence, a sign of a neighborhood downward trajectory. So what I'm saying is they created this shit. And they created the image of the black man. Oh man, federal government standards conspired not only make it nearly impossible for black families to leave the cities, but made it much easier for white families to do so and build equity and generational wealth along the way. Even whites who weren't racist found it financially sensible to take advantage of this social restructuring. Meanwhile, an important innovation in housing policies was taking place. The 30-year mortgage with a small down payment. Prior to this era, the terms of home loans were shorter, sometimes 10 years or less, which meant higher mortgage payments for working class whites prior to the New Deal. Home ownership was simply not financially possible. While the introduction of the 30-year mortgage ownership opened up to Americans like it never had before, not only was it appealing to move out of overcrowded cities, there had been a memorandum on new home constructions during World War II. But home ownership was a potential route to wealth accumulation that we was kept out of. From the white working class, it was the main route. It was a chance to have something to pass down to the next generation. And you wonder why we don't own the properties that we live in. I'm explaining this to you, so it's going to be a lot of reading. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of reading, but it's going to be a lot of information in these readings. So when you're on these platforms and you hear people from the right and the left talk shit, but they're not explaining to you what happened to our people. They have to explain to you what the government did and why there's an ADOS today. I agree. I agree. The terms do matter because our people are ignorant to a lot of things. Ignorant means not knowing. Conservative and liberal, they don't know. So yeah, they do matter. They matter a lot, and we have to explain to our people why where these terms come from and how our people align with these terms. It's imperative that we do that. These federally sponsored housing policies created both the black ghetto and white suburbs, such that by the time of the long hot summer of 1967, American cities took on what George Clinton would famously call a chocolate city, vanilla suburbs pattern. To the extent that any federally backed money went into ghettos, it was mostly part to the task of slum clearance. Many buildings were torn down, some never rebuilt, at least not for the purpose of housing. As a result, in many places, rents actually rose in the ghettos as whites moved to the suburbs. By 1967, a significant number of Puerto Ricans living in the ghettos had a real reason to not perceive the ghetto as theirs and in a meaningful way. They were barred from potential wealth accumulation through federal home loans because they was niggas. They were confined to neighborhoods not of their choosing. Their experience with government was through policing, inadequate home slums clearance, and legalized discrimination. The Fair Housing Act was not passed until 1968. Legalized discrimination in housing was still very much allowed by the summer of 1967. These images. Let me get a sip of water real quick. Although they may not have agreed on racial issues, working class whites and blacks did have some common political ground when they both were largely renters in cities. But this connection, however tenuous, was severed. Working class whites were increasingly becoming homeowners living in different political jurisdictions. As white flight occurred by 1967, around 60% of whites in metropolitan areas lived in suburbs. The political isolation of the ghetto dweller was nearly complete. When marginalization happens on such a severe scale, oppressed groups often begin to feel that we owe no obligation to the society that created their conditions. A merely marginalized population who do not see routine politics as a route to solving their problems of their lives often result to politics by other means, urban uprising and politics by other means. So this is an article. This was one of the articles that was explaining basically how the federal government was instrumental in creating our ghettos and our redliners and keeping us out of the accumulation of wealth of owning real estate. We couldn't get loans from banks. You had the eugenics society going on. You there, Moses? Okay, let me see. You there, Moses? Hold on for a second. Yeah. All right, hold on. Let me.
There it is. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you now. I can hear you now.
Man,
Yeah,
I couldn't get back to my Google Hangout, man. I was into the research, man. Let's keep going.
yeah, yeah. So what's your opinion? What's your opinion on what I just read, on basically what I broke down, as opposed to what our people is being told? Because this right here clearly shows how our ancestors was kept out of the economic loop after we fled the South to the North, how the federal government was complicit and redlining and keeping us from being able to get loans. They kept us out of the 30-year mortgages from acquiring real estate, which would accumulate wealth. They redlined us into cities and they charged us higher rent and these broken down cities. What's your opinion on that?
Man, it's spot on. I think we got to go a little bit deeper though, because there might be some in the chat who feel like we're not giving them any new information than they already know. So we got to give them a perspective, man. Would you mind if I go just a little bit deeper on that?
Yeah, go ahead. Go in, bro.
Pause. All right, so here we go, man. So there's a couple of things that we really need to look at. Number one is the credit history and how that's been moving throughout our nation. So in order to do that, we got to look at time and put time in relative to our freedom or our experiences, free people. So we already know what happened after the civil rights. We already know what happened during the Reconstruction era, the Freedmen's Bureau, working on getting African Americans. We were denied that promise of that 40 acres and a mule, but yet we still kept pressing. They had to figure out which would be our next avenue. Our next avenue would seem to be education. If we could just empower at least 10% of the African Americans to get educated, then they could come back and take the lead inside of our communities. Unfortunately, there was a withdrawal. I might be jumping a gun a little bit, but I'm gonna give them a taste. There was a withdrawal of the federal troops that allowed that semblance of peace in those southern regions where African Americans were still heavily populated. But what was going on at that time? There was a movement, an industrial revolution. There was things that were happening that African Americans were denied access to. I got to give you some dates and I got to give you some times and I got to give you some numbers to help quantify this opportunity that African Americans were denied. All right. So it's not just the federal government, but it's also private enterprise that is really involved in the discrimination against African Americans as we look at credit, and credit being the fundamental element of affording land being that primary thing that we were denied here in America. I'm gonna give you some back and forth, but I'm going with the credit history. Back in 1800, more than 90% of Americans lived in rural areas. Approximately 75% of the United States labor force was engaged in food production. This is based on credit history, the evolution of consumer credit in America. I can give you the source a little bit later, but I'm reading from the PDF. The census of 1800 didn't track those statistics on the length of an average work week or on the average annual wage. But you wouldn't be wrong to say that people worked for very long for very little. Travel was slow, dangerous, uncomfortable, and expensive. The trip from Boston to New York took 74 hours in a stagecoach that had no springs or climate control. Information moved at the speed of a horse or a sailing ship, which meant that it moved very slowly. But back in 1890, nearly 35% of the US population lived in urban areas. So there's been a shift. Less than 50% of the US labor force worked in farm occupations. American workers earned an average of around $475 a year. So they're taking statistics now, and there's an industry that's involved so they can actually track. The average work week was 60 hours. The number of wage earners working in the cotton textile industry had grown from 1,000 in the 1800s to 303,000 in 1900. Numbers were comparable in the iron and steel industry, 1,000 in 1800, 222,000 in 1900. I'm trying to bring you up to speed here because you're starting to see that the jobs that are being created, where are those jobs going to? You know, in the early 1900s, now you have labor unions that are coming along. Now you're going to have the regulations that say, well, we don't want kids working in the workforce because they're competing with white men for our employment opportunities. The man being the breadwinner, the head of household, now he is losing his way of making an earning and having his role justified or validated because these kids. The education system has to be revamped. That is the same thing that we're experiencing. We're looking at education. Booker T. Washington told us that we needed to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps by leveraging industry. But how do we do so in a world or in an America that does not respect our labor and does not compensate us? Those who are still on those farm occupations look just like you and me, Brother George. No matter where it was, where you originated or where your folks originated, they looked like us. They were not given that opportunity to work in the machinery or the iron or the steelworking industry. But let me move forward, brother George, because by the end of the 19th century, the United States was well on its way of becoming one of the world's leading industrial economies. And you don't get that way without slavery. Large scale factory production and falling transportation costs. You remember those black inventors who made those cars go vroom vroom and the automatic engines? You remember those refrigerators that allowed food to stay cold a little bit longer? Those black inventors that made all of those things possible, brother George? That's
Yep.
what's starting to happen when you don't have to pay African Americans for their great inventions. That's what happens when you can own a patent in perpetuity. Now you can benefit. Now the credit industry starts to move. The early 1900s, where GE can create a refrigerator and sell a refrigerator, but not really sell the refrigerator as fast as they're selling the credit that allows you to buy that refrigerator. Credit being a commodity for those who had wealth, wealth being a resemblance of the land that you own being your ability to defend it against taxes or against the state, and that being an inheritance tax. And that is one of the things that have divided us politically. So now let's keep it going. Back in the 1920s, for the first time, more than 50% of the United States population lived in urban areas. 1920s, for the first time, more Americans worked in manufacturing. 11.2 million of our Americans worked in manufacturing. And in agriculture, 10.8 million. Guess who was still stuck in the agriculture, doing the farming, doing the sharecropping? Tenant farmers. So they didn't even own the land, brother George. The average work week had decreased from 59 hours. Remember the regulations that came in?
Yeah.
Now the kids are in school. So the hours decreased from 59 in 1900 to 51 in 1920. Retail chains started to pop up. Between 1900 and 1920, the number of passenger cars registered in the United States increased from 8,000 to 8.1 million. Remember Martin Luther King Jr.'s protest with the people that were on the bus? Finally, when the labor unions start to kick up after the 20s and they tried to chase
Oh, shoot.
down and call it a communist red scare, because African Americans were moving away from the farms and into a position of, well, I want a job too. 35% of the US households had telephone service in 1920. In 1900, less than 8% of all US dwellings had electric service. But by the end of the 20s, the number was up to 68%. Who had the jobs making these homes have light, giving them electricity and telephones? George, who got to put up those telephone poles all across America?
The white folks. It wasn't us.
Now, what does that do when you got a job that allows you to work on that level compared to somebody who's tenant cropping or sharing a farm, making little to nothing? What does that do to you, brother George?
Yeah, and you know what's funny?
Now I could keep going talking about auto manufacturers, all the different type of mass communication, the expansion of consumer financing started to happen. So who are the banks going to look at when it comes to being a good somebody who's less risk? Probably somebody with a good job, somebody who's already been able to purchase things on credit. But if you're a tenant farmer, what are you trying to buy on credit? A shovel, brother George?
Right, and this is accumulation of generational wealth that affects us now that we don't realize. We're mad today because we say, look at the conditions of black people. What brother Moses reading now is not 17 to 1600s. This is the Industrial Revolution. This is in the 1900s, well after slavery. But let's not give them everything right now, Moses. Let's get to the other one, and then because I know how you gonna go. You go in.
Y'all good, man.
Let's save some.
Hey, man, I'm gonna have to go in, man.
Let's save some.
I'm gonna put on mute.
Yeah,
next one.
Yeah, you up now on the next one. This you. This one you. Here's why black families have struggled for decades to gain wealth, because it actually correlates with what you was talking about.
And I'm gonna go in. Should I bring it up on my screen, or are you gonna kind of navigate it on yours?
You can you see it good here, or you want?
Yeah, I can see it good on yours.
All right, okay, yeah, I'll do it then.
All right, so let's get it. Market Watch is one of my favorite people. They like to talk money. I just so happen to like to talk money as well, which is why I'm basing it off industry and land ownership. That's the basis of this conversation. And as long as the political parties are keeping African Americans from really owning land, then we really have no opinion. So let's talk about it. Here's why black families have struggled for decades to gain wealth. Comes from the market.
You're breaking up. Oh shit! White man.
Let's keep it going. There's a lot, but not for blacks.
Hold on a second. White man got his foot on your connection.
Are we bargaining? They don't want this information, man. They trying to hold it back, man. I thought this was fair information, man.
Try to start over. Try to start over. You borged all the way out.
All right, so Market Watch, one of my favorite sources because they talk about money. And as long as the Democrats or the Republicans, the political party can keep African Americans from owning land and owning wealth, then they're both doing their job. They're doing exactly what they were designed to do and put in their roles to do. So let's talk about it. Here's why Black families have struggled for decades to gain wealth. Comes from the Market Watch. I think this is an independent contributor, though, so let's get into it. There's been a long history of government policies that facilitated wealth for white Americans, but not for Blacks. Scroll up a little bit. Let's keep it going. I mean, scroll down. So, it starts off with Black History Month. It's become the time to reflect on all the progress Black Americans have made. But the sobering reality is that when it comes to wealth, the paramount indicator of economic security, there has been virtually no progress in the last 50 years. I would argue longer than that, but let's keep it going. Based on data from the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finance, the typical Black family has only 10 cents for every dollar held by the typical white family. While there is no magic bullet for racism, access to wealth and the security to pass it down from one generation to the next would go a long way towards changing the economic trajectory for Blacks. Researchers who study historical and contemporary racial inequality, as researchers who study it, we must conceive a wealth as a maker of success, but its true value is functional, the independence and economic security that it provides. They give you a chart right there, which kind of looks at the household wealth over time, going back from the 1980s to the 2016s. I got to say something. When I was born in 1980, around 1982, if you put your money in a, what was it, like what are the federal treasury notes? I think the rate of return was like 14%. Now, somebody in the chat, if you want to see what I'm going with this, look up what that bond is today if you put it in a federal treasury note. But 14%.
Dang.
All right, let's keep going. 14%, if you just put it in the bank, just give it to them. And you know how it works is if you want to save through like treasury notes, the market rate has to take, well, this is what you would get at zero risk, or for the government, which FDIC, if they're going to insure it, then the private, in order to compete with it and to get you to invest in their stocks, bonds, money market accounts, they have to give you a little bit of a premium. So if it was 14% for a treasury note, then it was probably 16, 17 for the stocks and bonds. But let's keep going, because this is what I did too. Out of slavery into the end of legal slavery in the U.S., enslaved people were considered valuable assets and a form of wealth. Now, I got to put a pin right there. I told you that when Abraham Lincoln was deciding that he wanted to give reparations, he assigned reparations for the landowners. And he told them, look, I will give you land if you move west and get rid of your slaves, abolish your slaves. And he said, I will give you $30 per slave if you free them, and I will give you $1.25 per acre of land. And they said, I will keep my slaves. $1.25 per acre, Brother George.
Right, I'm with you.
So enslaved people were considered valuable assets and a form of wealth. In the South, entrepreneurs and slave owners took loans out against the collateral value of their property. Am I bored again?
Yeah, just keep going.
All right, so they took out the loans as collateral value. We got to find which of the banks and the institutions that did all of these things, get them a list, and we got to find that information. It's somewhere on record, but we're going to need that to move forward with serious conversations. All right, and then keeping going, and they took out those loans to fund new businesses. So we got to find those businesses that they started off of those loans as well, because that's still the same blood money. The U.S. government has a long history of facilitating wealth for white Americans, from at least the Land Act of 1785, which is why I always go back, Brother George. Congress sought to transfer wealth to citizens on terms that were quite favorable. In some instances, land could be attained by the luck of a draw, but only if you were a white man. It was never the case that a white asset-based middle class simply emerged. They didn't just happen, Brother George, it wasn't because they pulled themselves up by their bootstraps, Brother George. It wasn't because they had self-help programs. They didn't have our brother AM1's tenacity to go and be a self-made person and do his individual thing there in the rough parts of Oakland. No, they didn't just emerge, Brother George. Rather, it was a government policy, and to some extent, literal government giveaways that provided whites the finance, the education, the land, and infrastructure to accumulate and pass down wealth. I don't think people understand that. I got to read it one more time without the distractions. It was never the case that a white asset-based middle class simply emerged. Rather, it was government policy and to some extent, literally government giveaways that provided whites the finance, education, land, and infrastructure to accumulate and pass down wealth.
Hey,
Before Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, he said the same thing. Go ahead, Brother George.
and real quick, just slide this part in there. I don't think people understand just how important that passage is right there. This is the reason why they were able to pass down generational wealth, and you don't see as much violence or poverty within their communities. They had government assistance when they were coming into the country as immigrants, and they were able to pass generational wealth down and have ownership of property, which accumulated wealth. We was kept out of that loop, and this is why you get what you get today within our communities. So I'll just shut up there and let you keep going.
It's important that they know it. They said that, so first, when they got here, they said, we will give you as many acres as you can till and as many slaves that you need to till it. Here we go to the, I'll keep going. While the 1866 Homestead Act sought to include blacks specifically in the transfer of public lands to private farmers, discrimination and poor implementation doomed the policy. Wasn't no 40 acres and no mule. We didn't get privilege of the benefit of that Homestead Act, Brother George. We were free, but discriminated against. Black politicians during Reconstruction attempted to use tax policy to force land on the market, but this was met with violent resistance. I got to put an earmark there because I remember having a conversation with one of the esteemed brothers who you brought to your panel, and I asked him he was saying that the government can't be involved. We need less government. And I'm like, okay, so what happens when it comes to, negotiations between, two individuals? He was like, well, what do you mean? I was like, well, what happens when it becomes violent negotiations? When somebody says, I don't want to work for that wage, or I don't want to do what you're telling me to do. And somebody else says, well, I want you to do it. What happens? And he said, well, that doesn't happen. And then he tried to move again and say, well, then the government needs to get involved. I'm telling you, the government was involved, and they sided on the side of not being fair. They sided on the side of, well, there's more violence happening. What are we going to do? They removed the federal troops. They took their hands off, Brother George. They let them die.
Right.
While blacks did make gains in wealth acquisition after chattel slavery ended, the pace was slow and started from a base of essentially nothing. Whites could use so they told them, you can have as much land as you could put a barbed wire fence around, and then allow them to have the slaves to put the barbed wire fence up. Let's keep going. Violence to force blacks from their property via the terrorism of white caping, where blacks were literally run out of town and their possessions stolen. This includes the race riots as in Memphis in 1866 and Tulsa in 1921, which systematically destroyed or stole the wealth blacks had acquired and lowered the rate of black innovation. Black wealth was tenuous without the rule of law to prevent unlawful seizures. So you got to understand, a lot of people don't like the integration, but it was originally a concept coined from the leaders before Martin Luther King Jr. that said we need equal rights and equal protection under the law, no matter where we go and no matter what ventures we're working in. And that was the idea. Let's keep going. By 1915, black property owners in the South had less than 1/10 of the wealth of white landowners. 1915 is going to be important, right? Because there's some flooding that's going to happen. The migration has to start kicking off, right? The war is going to start going along. So now you have an industrial revolution to where people are starting to make war armaments, but African Americans can't benefit from it. We got to make food rations and things like that. It's not going to be a fair and just society, and it's going to be that way because of the government policy. So this trend remains stable for the next 50 years. In 65, 100 years after emancipation, blacks were more than 10% of the population, but held less than 2% of the wealth in the United States and less than 0.1% of the wealth in stocks. wealth had remained fundamentally unchanged and structurally out of reach of the vast majority of blacks. So they're going to go into it. They're going to give you some numbers. Equity in your homes, 3.5% for blacks. You just couldn't own it. You couldn't pay off your home. Government bonds, which is what I was talking about when I was born. Look at that number, $25.5 billion. Now imagine that the white folks who actually benefited from those government bonds were receiving a 14% return, Brother George. 14%.
And this was in 1966. We was already fucked up. So we was like man, this is crazy. Like we never got a chance to ever recover or get any type of grounding because this is before the heroin and crack holocaust. So this is 1966 in these inner cities. Crazy, man.
Farm equity, 1.2% in the black population. So they gotta miss me, Brother George. They gotta miss me when they want to talk real big issues that have a whole lot of nothing to do with anything. Business equity, 1.2%. Money in the bank, 1.1%. The value of their stocks. Now, remember, I said the government bonds, if you had a stock in a company, they had to give you a little bit premium. 0.1%.
Okay.
That's it, Brother George. So all of the major factors, if you didn't have land and you didn't have industry, so you can work on the railroads and telecommunication and the manufacturing, and the labor unions weren't allowing, they were closed to African Americans, and that's going to move into the where you can live. Now you need credit to move into a home, and you can't get housing assistance. Your education system is separate but equal throughout the 1950s all the way into Brown versus Board. None of these, so you can't educate yourself out of the poverty class. You can't educate yourself off of that farm, and you're not moving into a position where you can get credit to buy the tools and machines that would help you do your job on the farm as a tenant farmer more effectively, and you're not establishing credit. Then how do you move into a space of buying bonds, stocks, and getting money in the bank and getting businesses for yourself on en masse? The numbers show that we weren't. And so here you are moving into the 60s, where housing assistance and education, where the Civil Rights Act will finally be passed, where anti-lynching is still a thing where it's not even a federal crime yet. There is no crime against lynching yet. A complicit Federal Housing Administration permitted the use of restrictive covenants, which forbade home sales to blacks. So not only can you scarcely afford it, you have a government policy that defined black communities as hazardous areas, directly reducing property values and increasing rates. So I'm going to charge you a higher interest rate. I can almost shed a tear for it. A general housing and lending discrimination against African Americans through the 20th and 21st century. Moreover, blacks were largely excluded from the New Deal and World War II public policies, which were responsible for the asset creation of the American middle class. GI Bill, for example, which we know of. I think I need to put a button there. Go ahead, brother.
Didn't our grandfathers fight in every war?
Absolutely.
And we was kept out of that economic loop, right? The economic windfall, right?
Absolutely.
They came home with their suits on. They came home to the projects. They didn't get this. They didn't get this government benefit that our grandfathers didn't get this government benefit. So when they see George always angry and always going in, now you understand why I'm so angry and why I'm not forgiving and why I may not hate all white people, but they are the beneficiaries of the complicity of the federal government, state and local law of bringing harm to my people. They benefit today because of what their grandparents got and was able to pass down, and they go to their good schools and the suburban neighborhoods when we were kept out of it. So no, I'm not forgiving. No, I'm not compromising. I'm very uncompromising. I'm bringing receipts. I'm showing you what they did to our grandparents. So when you say, oh, man, well, it's not all of them and just forgive them. And no, motherfucker, no. We didn't, listen, we wasn't born with one chromosome missing like we was just stupid people. We're born in economic deprivation, man.
Systemically, we are not inherently unequal. The eugenics society did a good job selling that narrative, and they have taught it and passed it along in some of the predominantly white institutions, but we are not. In 1934, the National Housing Act passed, and look at none of the benefits were actually accumulated for the African Americans or their experience when it came to credit in a capitalist society. It just doesn't work. You cannot have a system and an economy, a capitalist society that discriminates or prohibits the upward advancement or the capital churn for an entire group or an entire part of your society. Capitalism doesn't work like that. They want to argue free market. It was not a free market. It was a restricted market, and there's nothing that they can say or do to overturn that.
Shit, hold on.
Um,
I'm sorry.
I'm gonna put the pin right there. So out of slavery, we hit them. They got that information about the 60s. They see the types of financial instruments that African Americans did not get to benefit from coming through these periods. I talked about the type of work that was creating real sustainable families that was denied to African Americans. What more do we need on this one? This is your Market Watch update historically that brings us to the point of how were these ghettos created. Let's go to the next report. We got to keep giving them these receipts because I think they get tired of us screaming. They just need to hear it from somebody else, Brother George.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wait, where we at? Should I go down some more?
I think this one probably, I think we done probably gave them just enough on this one. So let me see. Building new wealth.
Yeah.
That's just going to say, but we're not there yet. The median wealth by education level. So I know, let's read that one just because yesterday and on the day before, there had been some conversations around the educated African-American. And you know, they say that the gateway to the middle class or the upward mobility is through education. We have African-American men and women who are partaking in this venture and they're believing in it. They've drunk the Kool-Aid. So a 2011 study shows that white Americans have more wealth than Black Americans, regardless of education level. I can't see the numbers exactly. Hit the three buttons by your profile picture and zoom in a little bit. So yeah, right there. Give me like 125. Go down to the zoom, the plus, yeah, right there. Increase a little bit.
Oh shit. Yeah,
I think you did it. Oh, 150. That's good. There we go. So that post-college degree, Brother O'Shea, I think MOT has one. Nyla Says has post-college. Quite a few of the brothers. What was his name? Information Man. $84,000 medium wealth. 84. But for their white counterparts, $293,000. We got to just let that sink in because rather than education leading to wealth, it is wealth that facilitates the acquisition of an expensive education. Wow. It's vice versa. You got to get them, man. You got to get them, man. So to be an educated brother, what we actually experience is African Americans who are in tremendous debt, not tremendous wealth. They're actually a lifetime of debt and paying back student loans rather than a lifetime of the ability to enjoy wealth. They're not creating wealth. Their intergenerational wealth. They're actually creating wealth and intergenerational wealth due to their interest rates. You know, it's 6% every year, or 6.8%, which is the student loan interest rate. 6.8% annual every year on $100,000 worth of debt means to somebody else's future. I'm gonna just leave it right there, and somebody in the chat who's smarter than me can drop it in there. The amortization schedule. How much would you have paid back for that $100,000? What is just your interest payments? That's what African Americans have. They have interest payments on student loans of $100,000 and no real wealth because their careers are paying them, what did it say? $84,000. All right. So we didn't hit it on the head. Let's go to the next one, Brother George. We got to keep giving them receipts because sometimes they don't want to hear us. If they hear it from somebody else, maybe they'll believe it. I'm going to go on mute. You up.
Yeah. Okay. So now we go to the. So what I'll do is I'll read this, and then you can come in and ad lib and break this thing down. The two-party system keeps racism in place. Now I always say, you got this bird, this image of this eagle here, and you have the eagle's head and the body, and then you got two wings. And these wings, both of these wings are connected to the same body. You got to have a good guy and a bad guy, and then one time that bad guy becomes the good guy, and the good guy portrays the bad guy, but it's all part of the government. They're all one and the same. So there's no right and no left. They all support each other. They go play golf together after the fucking show on TV. Throughout slavery reconstruction and movements and the movements for civil rights, African Americans in the U.S. have faced racism, social disparities, and oppression. While things have advanced for us significantly, Black Americans still encounter subtle and blatant social disenfranchisement. For instance, the United States has the highest incarceration rate in the world, and the people behind bars in the U.S. are disproportionately Black. Chronic disease like diabetes, arthritis, HIV, and cancer are more prevalent and diagnosed at later stages in the Black community due to poverty and harmful social and environmental conditions. We already explained how we got here. We explained what they did to us yesterday. So now you're seeing why we're at the bottom and we're the victims of all of these different things that's happening to us. Why does this race-based oppression continue today? Academic research from the universities such as Harvard and Stanford and follow-up reports from the Kerner Commission, as well as ordinary people are questioning why we have not yet overcome these racial disparities. To truly understand why we as a country have not yet triumphed over the race-based oppression, we have to look at the history of our political system and at what I believe to be the fundamental failure that is two-party control of our democracy. Political independence is the best choice for the Black community to break from party control and to gain greater political mobility. For the last century or so, there have been two major political parties that candidates and voters can be affiliated with: Democrat and Republicans. These parties determine the shape of election districts, which candidates are on the ballot, who appears on televised debates, and how issues are brought before legislative bodies, among many other things. Two-party control of elections and governments have been detrimental to the entire country for decades and has been truly harmful to Black people for centuries. I believe political independence is the best choice for the Black community to break from party control and gain greater political mobility. At the local level, election districts are gerrymandering between two parties. With black packed Democratic Party controlled districts. Closed party primaries allow the political machine to control the outcome by targeting these selected groupings of voters. Many people are already independent because they want to vote based on the quality of the candidate and not simply the party. The independent political movement is advocating for reforms to dismantle party control and give more power to voters, such as opening primaries to independent voters, nonpartisan, citizen-led restricting reform, and the rights to innovators and referendums. Being independent is about much more than voting. It's about shaping a process in which people of different backgrounds and community can work together across barriers to create positive, overdue change. More and more Americans, including people of color, are responding to the failure of party politics by becoming independents. Democratic Party elected officials have presided over disregarded for the health and safety of large numbers of Blacks in cities such as Chicago and New York. In Chicago, Democratic Mayor Richard Daley promised the residents of the Cabrini Green projects that after the projects were destroyed and new houses built, they would be able to return to the same community and live in better housing. Most of them were displaced. In New York, Mayor Bill de Blasio, who was elected as a progressive Democrat, and his appointed managers at the New York City Housing Authority allowed children and families to be exposed to dangerous health hazards. They failed to conduct mandated lead paint inspections and allowed residents to live in unsafe conditions, including unchecked mold, lack of heat, and dysfunctional elevators. Man. Black people have been associated with the Democratic Party for a long time, but that was not always the case. Both political parties were founded when most African Americans were still enslaved. It took a civil war and 100 years of hard, bitter, relentless struggle and sacrifice for Blacks to establish our citizenship rights that we basically barely even have today. The Democrat-Republican Party is the oldest party in America, founded in 1792 under Thomas Jefferson in opposition to the Federalists. It became known as the Democratic Party under President Andrew Jackson. It was the dominant party in the South, pro-slavery and violently racist. It was through the Democratic Party that the South established and maintained Jim Crow policies, lynching and segregation. The Republican Party began as an anti-slavery party in 1856 and became the party of Abraham Lincoln, who won the presidency in 1860. It promoted strong federal government. Immediately after the Civil War, African Americans began affiliating with the Republican Party. One of the here we go. One of the most destructive deals between the two parties was the Compromise of 1877, in which the Republican Party withdrew troops from the South in exchange for the presidency of Rutherford B. Hayes. So we went on to the Republican Party, but we was double crossed because the Republican Party never gave a fuck about us. The Republican Party was just trying to bring these Confederates back into the Union, and where they can keep America, basically keep America building to grow into a superpower. They didn't give a shit about the Negro people, because you got to remember, up north they was treating whites poorly in the factories. The agreement abandoned the recently freed people to the Southern Redeemers, who were intent on the re-enslavement of African Americans under a different system, which became known as Jim Crow, and the federal government did nothing about it. After Reconstruction and until 1960s, the South remained a one-party region. The Democratic Party disenfranchised blacks and held closed all white elections. Northern Democrats acquiesced to these disciplinary policies, and Franklin Delano Roosevelt refused to support the anti-lynching bills that was proposed during the long presidency. During the 60s, in the North, the Democratic Party started the civil rights to appeal to the increasing numbers of African Americans who were migrating to northern cities. At the same time, the Republican Party pushed out African Americans, turning to the South to gain votes with racial appeals to whites. Part of the strategy included Barry Goldwater, the 1964 Republican presidential candidate, voting against the Civil Rights Bill. Now, remind you, a lot of blacks went over to the Republican Party, but I told you, when it came down to keeping the Union intact, the Republican Party always double-crossed the Negroes. So we're going to explain to you how there was a mass migration from the Republican Party over to the Democratic Party. Republicans and Democrats alike included Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, all used anti-black law and order rhetoric to appeal to white voters. In 2008, Barack Obama was elected president by a diverse coalition that crossed party and racial divides and include independents, African Americans, and young voters hoping for a new political direction. True political empowerment requires the black community moving forward beyond the loyal constituency of any political party. In the 2016 election, voters were searching for a way to disrupt the political establishment, and now have the administration of President Donald Trump. We currently are at the height of political dysfunction and division in America. Well, we've been at the height of political dysfunction in America for the Negro. More and more Americans, including people of color, are responding to the failure of the party politics by becoming independent. Independent political identification is highest for younger members of African American community. The journey towards independence in the black community won't be easy. African Americans have been a key part of some of the most transformative developments in American history, including the abolition of slavery and the movement towards civil rights. Democrats will not want to lose the major portion of their voting demographic, but Americans of all races, liberals, progressive, moderates, would do well to follow the black community out of the Democratic Party towards political independence. The black community needs innovative approaches to quality in education, healthcare, housing, youth development, police, community relations, and much more. And these are all the stuff that we should have been getting in the early 1920s that we're trying to do now, where these other groups have like an 80-year head start on us after slavery. Imagine how the black community would benefit from an effective approach to public education that actually helps students learn and grow. Imagine real opportunity for poor youth to become part of the mainstream economy. True political empowerment requires the black community to move beyond being loyal consistency to a political party. Dismantling structural racism demands political independence, fused with the black community force of moral conscious and leadership. Such movements towards independence can transform American democracy over the legacy of the two-party control. So this is just one before I get into the next one to basically show you how these parties was complicit. Moses, you want to say anything before I go to the Max Boot? You there, Moses? What's going on?
Yeah, we want to make sure that we're giving credit to the people who.
Huh?
Yeah, can you hear me? You can't hear me? Can y'all hear me in the chat? Can you hear me in the chat?
Yeah, you borging out a little bit. We can hear you now, though. Say something.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, so scroll down a little bit to the very bottom. We want to make sure we're giving credit to the people who actually wrote these articles that we're giving them today, since they don't want to hear Brother George and Brother Moses. So Dr. Jesse Fields out of Harlem right there. So she actually wrote that for us.
Yeah, on board of the primaries. Yeah, and this one article basically shows how both parties was always complicit with each other. They worked in tandem, hand in hand. When we go here, this right here will basically show you the racism in the Republican Party. I'll read the first half of it, and then I'll let Moses come. Moses, what we'll do, this is a long article, so we don't have to read the whole thing. But what we'll do, I'll just pinpoint the meat. We'll pull the meat out. We'll pull out the most important parts.
Hey, before we make this transition, let me say one thing real quick, Brother George. So on what they were talking about, young African Americans who are a part of that Blexit, you know, we have some brothers that we dialogue with, and they're real close with some folks. One of them I do have to name drop because she is a young, powerful young woman, but she made a statement today in error. Her name is Candace Owens.
Oh, wait a minute, you break.
And she's on the cover of the Washington Post, the Huffington Post about 5 hours ago.
Oh, you break.
So Candace Owens.
God damn.
Man, I probably got up too many screens, man. They don't want us to live, man. They don't want this information.
Usually you'll never be breaking up, man. What the heck?
I don't know, man. My internet is running quick. I got a lot of kids here though, so they might be getting me. Or it could be the white man got his boot on my neck. But yeah, let me try it one more time. Candace Owens wrongly called the GOP's Southern strategy a myth 5 hours ago. And so this information that we're giving to you right now is relevant right now. As more African Americans youth start to try to see what their independent lens looks like and understand the political process, they may be turning to people like Candace Owens for their information. And Ava DuVernay was nationalist revisionist garbage is what she called it.
You're breaking up again. You know what this is what we'll do. I'll start reading some of it. Just take some of the windows down and I'll just control it from here. And
I got you.
Yeah, so I'll start read. I'm gonna read the first half and then you take the second half. And this right here is as you can see, this is a man, Max Boot, Jackie Robinson, and the racist problem in the Republican Party. Max Boot could have had an awakening decades ago if he didn't listen to black conservatives. Now, this is an article where they show you how blacks left the Republican Party and went over to the Democratic Party and why they left in the first place. So when you hear people talk this shit about the liberal stuff, and well, there's a reason why so-called blacks became liberals in the first place, because they were let down and led astray, bamboozled, hoodwinked, and led astray by the Republican Party. The American writer and self-described lifelong conservative Max Boot have experienced the racial change of heart about the Republican Party half a century after many others were forced to do the same. In his book, The Corrosion of Conservatism, Why I Left the Right, an excerpt of which ran in the Washington Post on Tuesday, Boot argues the American conservatism and Republican Party under Donald Trump has been irreparably degraded, and the overwhelming strength of Trumpism has made Booth reconsider conservatism itself. Now he argues that the GOP must suffer repeated and devastating defeats. So let's get into it. In the book, Booth not only details his own political history as Booth, a conservative and a mover and shaker in the Republican circles of influence, but attempts to phrase what the hell happened to the conservative movements he once so believed and now rejects as a movement with deep links to white supremacy, he writes. In 1964, the GOP ceased to be the party of Lincoln and became the party of Southern whites. As I now look back and with clarity of hindsight, I'm convinced that coded racial appeals had at least as much, if not more, to do with electoral success of the modern Republican Party that all the domestic and foreign policy proposal crafted by well-intentioned analysis like me. That is what liberals have been saying for decades. I never believed them. Booth's willingness to self-reflect should be commended. Now, I'm not by no means taking up for the liberals, but I'm using this to show you why black people left the Republican Party and came over to the Democratic Party, and I'm showing you why neither one of these parties was ever for us. And the reason why I'm reading this article today, because this right here lets you know when you hear the ABLs and the Brandon Tatums and all these the Candace Owens and all these people, they are full of shit. Because people are not going to really go in and really bring this out for you guys. So you notice we'll only get up to 40 people in the chat room. We won't have 150 people in the chat room because most of our people really don't want information. They want raggedy shit. So when I'm giving you real information, now when you guys hear these people talk these right wings and left wings, you can say bullshit. I'm independent. Okay, so let's get off into it. Booth's willing. It's just uncomfortable that he's arrived at this conclusion 3 generations behind the times. At these conclusions, and these conclusions weren't reached by liberals. They were established by neutral observers, journalists, and prominent black conservatives like Jackie Robinson, who all identified the problem as it unfolded for decades. Since the early 1960s, black Republicans and black conservatives have seen the whitening of the Republican Party and the increasing racial extremism of the conservative movement. They protested outside the 1964 Republican National Convention and lobbied Republican leaders. Eventually, many decided to stop voting for the GOP altogether, starting unequivocally that they were doing so because they felt they were no longer welcome in the grand old party. One man wrote a letter to the New York Amsterdam News. Any Negro who helps the cause of Goldwater should be declared anything but a Negro, because they will be a traitor to the Negro people. Look at how our people was together back then. See, this is what I'm saying. Like, we've lost all sense of identity or cultural integrity. It's just that no one else listened then and now, including Booth, who admits in the book that he had never actually read Goldwater's writings. This is the shit that I'm talking about. We're so far gone to believing in these people. We don't even study these people politics. We don't care. We just vote whether Democrat or Republican, and we fight down these lines. Booth has understandably received a fair amount of criticism for his sudden revelations from the right, who marvel at how he went so long without reading the work of the conservative movement's biggest names, and from some on the left who wondered whether Booth's decision to leave the Republican Party will have lasting ramifications on a party that may be already too far gone. But the stories of the black conservatives who tried to tell America that something was deeply wrong with the Republican Party, many of them loved deeply, aren't too far gone to be remembered and are to be retold today. Now here we go. The greatest stand of the black Republican. To Booth's credit, he writes extensively in his book about his belated recognition of the horrifying racial politics of the conservative movements, of which he was so enamored as a young person, culminating in the 1964 campaign that pitted Republican Barry Goldwater against Democratic and Republican Lyndon B. Johnson. The campaign marked an inflection point for conservatism as it turned away from black voters to white Southerners and white rural Americans more broadly. In the book, Boot writes of National Review founder William F. Buckley. Buckley also editorialized the National Review against desegregation. Man, one notorious 1957 editorial, "Why the South Must Prevail," claimed that the white community in the South is entitled to take such measures as necessary to prevail politically and culturally, because for the time being, it is the advanced race. The editors went on to say, shockingly enough, to assert that the majority of the Negroes in the South who do not vote do not care and would not know for what to vote if they could. This is a blatant and ugly statement of racism, as one might have misfortune to read. I want to go. I ain't gonna read the black part. I'll read this last part, and then I'll let Moses come in and read the second half. It's worth noting that while the National Review permitted L. Brent Boswell to publish a rebuttal to the two-piece 2 weeks after publishing, Boswell himself ghostwrite Barry Goldswater 1960 Conscience of Conservatives, which argued extensively against desegregation efforts. And it's funny how you hear these black conservatives, they never ever bring up Barry Goldwater as to why blacks left the Republican Party. You never hear them mention this. It's funny. It's what's going on, Shalisa? What's up, AM1? It's funny, but black conservatives and black journalists didn't need 60 years to recognize that the GOP was turning toward racism, both outright and subtle. Nor did they require six decades to see, as Boot does in the book, that regarding Goldwater's actual words, something I had not done before reveals he really was an extremist. For example, black writers in the South, like Birmingham world editor Emory Jackson, was writing in black publications about the problems the racist right was causing in the South, and what black Americans finally able to exercise their right to vote after the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 could do it. In an interview with Jet magazine in 1965, Jackson detailed what was taking place on the ground in Alabama with regards to civil rights, telling journalist Francis Ward that the backbone of legal segregation was broken in Alabama if Republican Congress members were voted out of office. So this is your Republicans. These are our ancestors writing in magazines talking about the Republican Party that they supported for generations, that actually turned their backs on them in support of the Democratic South. And this is why you had the large droves of blacks supporting another racist president, Democratic president. You there, Moses?
Yes, sir. And you know what's going to happen, right? You know what's going to happen in Alabama, man. I got to read this black part. Working relationships with Negroes. At least 3 of Alabama's 5 Republican congressmen, all of whom campaigned on strict segregationalist platforms, represent districts with heavy Negro concentrations, Jackson pointed out, and could be affected by increased Negro registration. So the voter registration drive, Brother George, Jackson gave the following appraisal of key cities in the state. Gadsden, federal orders have desegregated schools and restaurants. The city, Jackson asserts, was once a stronghold of the White Citizens Council, and their influence can still be.
Damn.
Am I breaking out or am I good?
We'll start over. Just start from where you at.
Montgomery, the racial climate, according to Jackson. What you hear? Still breaking?
It's well, when you start talking, it comes. When you start reading it,
they don't want this work. I'm telling you, they don't want this work. We know that our good brother Martin Luther King Jr. is going to march on that bridge to Selma. We know that. We know that they're going to bring out the hounds and the water hoses, and they're going to lock them up. They're going to hit women and children with them water hoses and with them attack dogs. They finna get real violent against us right there in Alabama. We know that because the voter registration drive is kicking off. They trying to urbanize the bus boycotts wherever we can work. They trying to get that influence to start working in political favor for us. And that's what's finna happen. So Montgomery, racial climate, according to Jackson, is much improved. City officials are dealing intelligently with problems. Hometown Negro leadership, he feels, must become more vigorous and shuck the paternalism of whites that has held back solutions to problems. Man, I had to read that, man. That was from the Jet magazine when the Jet magazine used to be the thing.
Right.
All right.
But let me just say this real quick to my brother Donald Will. He says the point of conservatives are the more racist camp, no matter which party they're occupied. Think conservative, not Republican, as the enemy. I agree. The reason why we have to do this, though, because people think you hear this Brexit and people say mass exit of the Democratic Party, but you got black agents that's complicit in sending our people back to the Republican Party. We need to leave the Democratic Party and form our own parties. 46 to 50 million of us. We need to have our own independent party and gain political power from there and dictate what we want. I have to do this because I have to show people when they say this Brexit, don't go back to the Republican Party. Go ahead, Moses, you can go on.
Can you hear me? This is probably going to be in favor of some of our brothers, though. They're going to love this section. And as extensively detailed in the book, The Loneliness of the Black Republican, the lonely Black Republican. Oh, I'm going to shed 2 tears for him. Politics and the pursuit of power. Black conservatives in the 50s, 60s, and 70s mobilized
hey, wait,
hey, against Barry Goldwater.
Moses, you got to Ethernet cord?
Yeah, my Ethernet cord's plugged. Oh, nah, that's way downstairs.
You know what? You might have to go check that. That's what, because your joint don't never see if it's like rattled or something. I'll read some more, and then when you come back up, just tell me, and I'll stop so you can keep reading. Check your Ethernet.
I'm gonna go turn off all the kids' internet right now. They got to lose all their technology. So I'll be back.
All right, I'll read on from here. As an extensively detailed in the book, The Loneliness of the Black Republican, Pragmatic Politics and the Pursuit of Power, Black conservatives in the 50s, 60s, and 70s mobilized extensively against Barry Goldwater, arguing rightly that Goldwater a loving embrace of the South Manifesto and a 1956 speech by Southern Democrats that rejected school desegregations as destroying the amicable relations between whites and Negro races posed a real danger to blacks to Black Americans everywhere. P.L. Practice, a Black journalist for the Chicago Defender, wrote in 1961, "Are Negroes to be first class or citizens or not? Are you in favor of that? Are you in favor of the Southern Manifesto?" And then there was Jackie Robinson, the first Black man to play Major League Baseball and a staunch Republican, who wrote extensively on the GOP failures to reach out to Black voters and the creeping forces of racism within the party. In his syndicated newspaper column, Robinson spoke constantly about his concern that his party was turning against him and other Black Americans. In 1957, he and other Black Republicans saw the RNC put together Operation Dixie, a voter recruitment effort aimed purely at white Southerners, while also noticing the efforts to recruit Black voters weren't getting funded. The danger of the Republican Party being taken over by the lily white conservatives is more serious than many people realize, he wrote in 1963. And this is the great ancestors Jackie Robinson talking about the Republican Party. And why, when you hear people today talk about Brexit, it's funny that you don't hear these Black agents on here telling you the history of why our ancestors left the Republican Party and went over to the Democratic Party, because you had one wing saying, well, we'll give these Negroes what we want. We'll sign the civil rights bills over. We'll give them, we'll get rid of the unfair housing. We'll do some of these things, so-called, and give them a bunch of broken promises, in which the Democratic Party did. But the Republican Party gave us a bunch of unbroken promises, starting in 1877 when they pulled the troops out and allowed us to be slaughtered. So let's go down. This is the image here of the great ancestor Jackie Robinson. It's funny. It's funny how when you hear when we get these platforms together and we on there, we arguing Democrat and Republican. You got 800 people in the chat room, but when you come and you unpack and bring the receipts to show people what's really going on and how this shit is really and how things really go down, black people really don't want to tune in and see. So I'm telling black people in the chat, for the 33 people that's watching, you can't save everybody. Don't try to save everybody black, because everybody black don't want to be saved. You can only work with those who wants to be helped, who wants to work with you. That's the only thing that you can do. You can only work with the people that want to be helped. You can only you got to build with the people in your circumference and begin to build different communities and hope that other people can see it and take on that body and begin to emulate it and move it around. But you ain't gonna help all Negroes, because Negroes don't want help. Some of our people are just so far gone. It's kind of like Scar and the Lion King. Like, there's no helping them. They're too far gone. And this type of information that me and Moses is bringing right now, it should be 700 people in the chat room. And we should be having dialogue. People should be begging to come onto the platform to either agree or disagree. People should be saying, hey, oh, I read something about that. I want to come on. I either agree or disagree. Black folks don't care. Black folks just go along with what anybody tell them, and they say, okay, that's the normal. Yeah, I'm going to rock with that because he said so. A lot of these people ain't as intelligent as you think they are. A lot of people aren't intelligent as you think they are. They get on there and they say a bunch of fucking words, and you think that they said something deep. But you only think they said something deep because you never took the time to study. You never took the time to research what they were talking about. So let me read on before Moses comes back upstairs. You came back yet, Moses? Okay, he didn't come back yet. Robinson attended and protested outside of the 1964 Republican National Convention, which Smithsonian Magazine describes as the ugliest Republican convention since 1912. In his 1972 autobiography, I never felt I never had it made. Robinson detailed what happened there and an experience as he described one of the most unforgettable and frightening experiences of my life, adding, as I watched the steamroller operation in San Francisco, I had a better understanding of how it must felt to be a Jew in Hitler's Germany. It was a terrible hour for the relatively few black delegates who were present. Distinguished in their communities, identified with the cause of republicanism, an extremely unpopular cause amongst blacks. They had been served notice that the party they had fought for considered them just another bunch of niggers. They had no idea. This is coming from Jackie Robinson. This ain't George Macon. This is Jackie Robinson. They had no real standing in the convention, no clout. They were unimportant and ignored. One bigot from the Deep South state actually threw acid on a black delegate's suit jacket and burned it. Another one from the Alabama delegation, where I was standing at the time of the Rockefeller speech, turned on me menacingly while I was shouting, come on, Rocky," as the governor stood his ground. He started up in his seat as if to come after me. His wife grabbed his arm and pulled him back. "Turn him loose, lady. Turn him loose," I shouted. He ain't want no work with Jackie Robinson, would have whipped his ass. I was ready for him. I wanted him badly, but luckily for him, he obeyed his wife. In 1967, Robinson would write, "During my life, I had a few nightmares which happened to me while I was wide awake. One of them was the National Republican Convention in San Francisco, which produced the greatest disaster the Republican Party has ever known. Nominee Barry Goldwater. Goldwater would lose the election in a landslide, partly because black Republicans like Robinson and thousands of other voters for Johnson and against racism of Goldwater's campaign. In an interview in the Chicago Defender after the election, Edward Brooke, the black Republican Attorney General of Massachusetts, said Negroes simply could not accept his marriage to the Southern reactionaries. We can't We can't say to Negroes, come to us. We've got to go after them. And this is the Republicans trying to come back. You there yet, Moses?
I think so. Can you hear me?
Yeah. You can take on from here, right here, where we can't say to Negroes.
We can't say to Negroes, come to us. We've got to go after them. But it wasn't just black conservatives or black journalists, or even just black Americans in general, who again and again pointed to racism in the GOP as being a real problem for both the party and America. White Republicans and the party's observers understood too that racism was an issue for the party's future. Even during the 1964 presidential race that Robinson and other black conservatives were so angered by, a white journalist for the New Yorker who followed the Goldwater campaign asked why, in Goldwater's constant willingness to speak his mind, there was no explanation for his reluctance to say anything that would upset the racists. But unfortunately, they decided that in a contest between black Americans and white votes, the latter was of greater interest. Oh, that Richard Nixon dude, that Southern strategy was real, man.
Yeah. So let's just take this last part. Oh, wait a minute, hold on, not all that. I wanted to hold on, let's point out. In 19. Okay, so this is Richard Nixon when he said what Republicans must do to regain the votes. In 1962, then failed presidential candidate Richard Nixon sat down with Ebony magazine to go ahead. You take this part right here, Moses. Take this part.
Yeah, he sat down with Ebony, not Jet, but Ebony, to explain how he could have won against JFK in 1960 had he had 5% more votes in the Negro areas. So somebody in the chat said, oh, there's not enough African Americans to dominate either party. It's not about domination, but that 5% more votes in our areas can turn an election. And had the GOP done a better job campaigning with black Americans, we can't say the Negroes come to us. So I've already read that part.
Yeah, we down here where, oh yeah.
Is he bitter or disillusioned? No, I'm not, but I'm more concerned than ever, said Nixon. I feel this campaign taught me one thing. The GOP is almost non-existent among Negroes. And if we are to survive, we must tackle this problem. That's what he said. 6 years later, he would use the racially motivated Southern strategy. I'm telling you, it's real, to finally win the White House by using the increased number of black Democrats to push white Democrats to the GOP. As Nixon's political strategist, Kevin Phillips, told the New York Times. That's what we're experiencing today in reverse, by the way. The black Democrats used to push white Democrats to the GOP. We're seeing the black Republicans trying to push black Democrats back to the GOP now again. So it's just a different change of a name, but pushing us towards that middle is going to be an interesting political strategy coming up. So I'll keep going. As the talk about Republicans making inroads into the Negro vote is persiflage. I don't even know what that means.
Me neither.
Oh, so even Jake the Snake, I thought Jake the Snake was a wrestler. Senator Jacob K. Javits only gets 20%. From now on, the Republicans are never going to get more than 10 to 20% of the Negro vote, and they don't need any more than that. But Republicans will be short-sighted if they weaken enforcement of the Voting Rights Act. The more Negroes who register as Democrats in the South, the sooner the Negrophobe whites will quit the Democrats and become Republicans. That is heavy. The more blacks are registered, the more whites are going to quit that party and become Republicans. So that's crazy.
So what do you think happens if we just withdraw from both parties and form our own parties? What do you think the shakeup would be between these parties, because they actually need our votes? But you know what I'm seeing happening with the influx of these immigrants coming in, and you're looking at the Latino population, and they say they have a large Latino voting outcome. They're trying to replace our vote with that Latino vote.
They've done their numbers. They did their homework and realized what their vote power is as a voting bloc. Unfortunately for us, we'll start seeing that upwardly mobile Hispanics and Asians vote white.
Yeah, well, and a lot of them identify as white. So they're coming over here and they don't identify with you, or your struggle. So they come over. You see them, a lot of them are going over to the Republican Party, actually even supporting Trump.
And crazy enough, even though they vote white and identify as white, they sure benefit a lot from those welfare and benefit programs and being able to go to school and once they get that education, opening up businesses. Where you see their businesses at, where the property value is lower. Where's the property value lower? Right there where them blacks and Hispanics are.
Right. Well, you gotta remember that so-called $600 billion spending power or whatever is in the black community. So through the system of capitalism, we fund their American dream. So they come here to make the dollars off of us because somebody has to be the consumers, and that's us. So, and this is, but see, what we broke down here from the beginning when we showed the federal government and how they was complicit in creating ghettos, how they was complicit in keeping us out of the economic loop generationally. We actually showed what they did from the Industrial Revolution all the way back to 1877 to when they took the troops out of the South, how they redlined us, how they did. We showed these different things. So we was kept in economic deprivation as a group by the federal government. They had laws set in place. Like we showed the laws. So I think it's imperative that we do these kind of things because you have a lot of people talking on YouTube, but most of the younger people coming up today, they don't understand. I had a young guy say to me, Moses, like, why is everything always so fucked up? Like, how did we get here? He had no clue. He just don't know. He asked me, he said, since I was 11 or since I was a kid, the same fucked up buildings on my block has been the same fucked up buildings. And my mom telling us to go vote, but none of this shit ever changed. And he don't understand why it don't change. He doesn't have an understanding for what happened to his grandfathers because he don't even know his grandfather. He never met his grandfather. So what I'm saying is when we talk about these things that happen to our people and we're reading how the federal government created ghettos, we don't understand at the same time how they wasn't giving us loans, how they wasn't allowing us to acquire wealth. That broke up black families.
And you got to tell them, like, this was your grandfather. This was his era while he was coming up. What year was your granddad born, Brother George?
1912.
1912. So he lived through everything we're talking about, from the wars to the movement to the migrations of the cities, the packing of the urban ghettos. But you couldn't own the home, you couldn't own the job, you couldn't get the same wage, all the way to the education system, the restaurants that he couldn't access, so the business capital that he had no access to, all the way through these. That was him. He was 30, 40 years old by the time this started happening.
Yeah.
He had 20, 30 years of not being able to benefit from citizenship. Brother George?
Here you go right here, Moses. Look at this. Who this elder right here? Who this
is that? Mary?
Come on, man. You know it.
Hey, Mary, how you doing? I go back in time just to kiss that woman in the face. How you doing, Mary?
This is a great answer. I'm gonna read some of this and explain the bullshit that they was doing to our people.
Oh yeah, let's get into this one right here. This is one of my favorite stories right here. I got to go on mute for that. This is one of my favorite people in the world.
You want to read? You want to read it?
You started off though, because I got to sit back and just absorb it for a second. Go ahead, brother.
Why FDR didn't support Eleanor Roosevelt's lynching campaign. Now, I did a video last month, Monica, where I showed the lynchings in America, and I'm supposed to have part 2 coming. I've been BSing around, but I did a video where I talked about the lynchings in America, and I talked about how there was 4,000 lynchings from 1877 to 1954. Over 4,000 recorded lynchings in America, and the government they didn't have an anti-lynching. There was no anti-lynching legislation, so we're gonna show like exactly how the government was complicit in this. All right, in December 2018, the U.S. Senate passed the federal anti-lynching bill. Look at this, Monica. Watch this, Monica. In 2018, the U.S. Senate passed a federal anti-lynching bill. But wait a minute. For the first time, how is this a significant milestone? Now, the significant milestone is preceded by at least 240 failed attempts since 1901 to pass any bill or resolution mentioning lynching in Congress. These attempts to outlaw lynching peaked during Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt was a strong supporter of anti-lynching legislation, but FDR never supported it for fear of alienating white Democratic voters in the South. See, this is the shit what we got to understand. Well, I tell you, neither one of the parties was ever really for you.
Brother George, I got to make it relevant to the people who's listening right now. There were 3 people who pioneered this, and you'll know their names because they're running for president, 2 of them. Number 1, what's that dude name? Cory Booker, right?
Right.
Running for president. Number 2, Kamala Harris. And then number 3, Tim Scott. Now, you remember Tim Scott, that's that South Carolina Republican who declined to be a part of the Black, Congressional Black Caucus, but he's also notorious for the opportunity zones. Got to tell you about that bill. Opportunity zones. States can designate up to 25% of their low-income estates or their low-income, well, let me use the right terminology, census tracts is what they call it. Wow. There's more than 8,764 census tracts, up to 25% of those low income ones. So that is the redistribution. All right. So now you know the 3 power players, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker. They tried to put it on there. It got passed in the House. Oh, no, it got passed in Senate, but it's still sitting on the floor. The House hasn't even pushed it forward yet. The anti-lynching bill. It's still legal to lynch people, Brother George. Why the brothers get shot down?
Okay, that's considered a lynching now. That's why the police are still getting off. So they're not hanging you from a tree by your neck anymore. They're just shooting you down in the street, and they're getting off of it. Or they beating the shit out of a black woman in the Dallas parking lot, and he really gets charged with really anything. I'm gonna read on. Now watch this, Moses. This is where your real fuckery comes into play. Now, most men, we both married.
Yes, sir.
I lay in the bed with my wife at night. If I'm a very powerful man and I'm pushing a certain agenda, how am I laying in the bed with a woman that's totally against the agenda that I'm pushing? How does that work, Moses?
It doesn't work well for you, brother.
It doesn't work well, right?
So something's gonna change. Yeah,
it's gonna change. So now we have. Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor joined the NAACP during FDR's first term in 1934. Well, why would this woman join the NAACP, and why would the NAACP even invite her with open arms and begin working with leader Walter White to outlaw lynching? This work earned her a lot of enemies. See, this is where they play both sides of the fence. This is where they infiltrate. They play one side. He got his wife on the other side, and it makes it seem like she's doing the work. It's kind of like your Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints that enter Africa and come with this Jesus and food and bear, while their husbands and their governments is destroying and raping Africa. But they send these goddamn Christians in there to so-called help the people and heal the people and give them food. It's bullshit. So she go in and say, hey, I'm part of the NAACP. So now critics of her husband, like J. Edgar Hoover, spread racist rumors that she was mixed race.
Walter White was a white man. He was actually white, but he was the executive secretary of the NAACP from 1931 to 1955. I believe he was a lawyer, and his aim was to fight cases on a legal precedent. Keep going, brother.
Yeah. Her work would also cause a rift between her and her husband, whom she could never convince to support her cause. Some bullshit. So then you see the image here of her and the powerful ancestor here, Mary Bethune-McLeod. Mary McLeod, I always say her name backwards. Mary McLeod Bethune. First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt with Mary McLeod Bethune at the National Youth Administration Director of Negroes Activities at the opening session of the National Conference on Problems of Negro and Negro Youth. In the mid 30s, the NAACP persuaded Democratic Senator Robert Wagner and Edward Costigan to sponsor an anti-lynching bill. The legislation couldn't survive without the president's support. So Eleanor arranged a meeting with White and FDR to try to convince the president to enforce it. The meeting didn't go well. Somebody's been priming you. Was it my wife? Damn, he was real. He was real vicious with it too. Savage. FDR asked an annoyance after White presented his case. If I come out with an anti-lynching bill now, Southern Democrats will block every bill I ask Congress to pass to keep America from collapsing. I just can't take the risk. So basically what he's saying, Moses, is to keep us from being lynched. I can't stop you niggas from being lynched because the welfare of America is at stake. So you niggas have to continue being lynched. You have to take one for the team. You Americans, see, but watch this. When you really put in this proper context, I'm gonna read that again. Somebody's been priming you. Was it my wife? FDR asked in annoyance after White presented his case. If I come out with an anti-lynching bill now, Southern Democrats will block every bill I ask Congress to pass. To keep America from collapsing, I can't take that risk. So now when we talk ADOS and we talk about how they owe us, this right here could be read on the floor in Congress. This right here could be read to the Senate and the House of Representatives. A standing president refused to sign an anti-lynching bill when black people were being murdered wholesale at the behest of not allowing Southern Democrats to block and America may collapse. So we had to be the burden bearers of an internal fight between white folks. Our people were still being murdered, and the president did nothing about it, even when he knew it was happening. What you got to say about that, Moses?
I got to say, man, once it got depressing on the white folks, man, it got depressing. It was the Great Depression, man, and the jobs was out there. The jobs was looking lovely. They was taking care of their homes that they bought on that new credit. Man, they had that new credit with that new refrigerator that black man built, but GE gave them a refrigerator, and they was living nice. Then they had stocks, they had bonds, they had everything, and it crashed on them. And the president was like, man, I'm just trying to hold us together, and he couldn't hold them together. I think the president was saying at this time that there were more important issues than race matters right now. I think that's what he was saying. And that's why he was pushing us to the side. And even though we had black Republicans, the black cabinet, and even the women and then the youth, the NAACP, you know, I'm probably one of the hardest critics of the NAACP, the Black Chamber of Commerce, and the Congressional Black Caucus. And it's because of times like this where things got the hardest, where it seems like we had to acquiesce to, oh, okay, well, now is not a good time. When can I give you a call back? And it may have been the safer alternative, but yeah, there was union violence going along. There was so much happening to us that we needed strong leadership, and that leadership was not effective up against the odds at the time when we needed the most. That's what I got to say right there.
Those bills he wanted to pass to keep America from collapsing were part of the New Deal. At the time, the Southern Democrats in the Senate are holding the New Deal hostage and refusing to move on the New Deal issues unless the rest of the Democratic Party backs off the anti-lynching bills, says Eric Ronchway, a history professor at the University of California, Davis. Now, this is the thing. The historians understand and know this. This even strengthens our ADOS argument, where we're saying that this is even during slavery. After slavery, under the 14th, 15th Amendment, we were supposed to be protected.
Yep.
The federal government did not protect us. We were being murdered. They chose to stand pat with the Democrat-held Senate in order to get certain things pushed through at the behest of us dying. This is well known. This is not something that's not made up. Our people were being murdered wholesale. And when we came to the government for help, the government turned their backs on us. And basically what they said, Moses, get back to us another time. We got some other issues going on right now.
Get back to that farm, nigga.
That's basically what they said to us. The demographics of the Republican Democratic voters back then were much different than they are today. From the mid-19th century through the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Democratic Party's base was made up of white Southerners in the South and Catholics and immigrants in big industrial cities in the North and in the West. A banner, a man was lynched yesterday. Look at this shit here. A banner drawing attention to the lynchings hangs outside NAACP headquarters in New York in 1936. Look at the old cars and shit. That's a real awkward coalition to hold together if you're talking about issues of race. Ronchway says, in the South, racist laws and practices prohibited Black Americans from voting. When thousands of Black people moved north during the Great Migration, they began exercising their right to vote in such big industrial cities that Democrats had counted on for votes. Some Democrats, like Senator Wagner, courted these new votes by supporting civil rights legislations. See, this is the shit. This is the bullshit. When we got from the South up to the North, we began to vote in large droves. So what they was counting on us not voting, but we started voting in large droves, it started to hurt them. So now they started to support civil rights legislation all of a sudden. See, years before they told us to get back to us. Get back to us. We got other shit going on. Now we're fleeing the South, coming north. We're voting, and it's putting a dent in their in their party. So now they're starting to support some other things, but they never supported that anti-lynching bill. Others like FDR chose to hold on to Southern white votes instead. See, so when the Democrats won both the presidency and the congressional majority in 1932, you had this kind of split party. Ronchway says. Yeah, you can read the rest from there, Moses, and we'll play the video.
All right, can you hear me? All right, good. Hey, I got to give them just a little bit of a segue right before we go in. So you remember I told you about the types of jobs that was out there, and this guy came with this grand new deal, and African Americans wanted a piece of that deal. They was migrating for this deal, these jobs. So let me tell you about some of these jobs or some of these programs. They say, well, what will the ADOS look like if it's programs specifically for African Americans? They call it, if you look on the ADOS 101, programs designed specifically for them. They call it the Green New Deal or the Great New Deal, and it's patented off of some of this that I'm going to tell you right here. National Industry Recovery Act. So those that big industry jobs, right? Got to get some of that. There was some collective bargaining for labor. Agricultural Adjustment Act. It introduced measures to reduce crop supply, stabilize prices, and support farm incomes. They wanted a little bit of that because they're sharecroppers, right? So it sounded good. Income and wealth taxes. Now, we probably couldn't benefit from that, but progressive taxation and taxation of wealth consistent with the revenue increases that it achieved. So the more money that you get, the more progressive the taxes. We hear that still today. Indian Reorganization Act. Well, that was for our Indian brothers and sisters. Virgin Islands Company, Brother George. That's for our brothers there. You know, sugar and rum, you got to get drunk, man. We need that. But there was also a coordinated homesteading program. So they needed to get the homes good in the Caribbean. U.S. Travel Bureau. People wanted to move around. Banking stabilization and financial reform. Emergency banking. The Glass-Steagall Banking Act. The FDIC in 1933, ensuring those banks. Securities. The Gold Reserve Act. We remember that. So there was a lot there. Now let's get to the good ones. Relief and welfare, the Federal Emergency Relief Act, the Federal Surplus Commodities Corporation, emergency relief appropriations, and then the Social Security Act. So you got an aging demographic, you got a working demographic, you got a young folks who are going to school. Now you got the opportunity to earn some money as men. What are you going to do? You're going to go up there where them jobs are. So let's see what the NAACP responds. So they hoped that it could convince the new ruling party to finally support anti-lynching legislation. So they just still didn't want to be killed.
Right.
Which civil rights activists have been trying to pass for decades, since at least the end of, is that what they talk about? The ghost towns? I mean, what do they call it? The sunset towns, right?
Yeah, sundown town.
Sundown town. So they were trying to leave and they were trying to move to places like Chicago, but that's a long road trip for people who may not have, you know, the best working vehicles. If they do have one, if they're horseback or walking. So depending on how they were trying to migrate, those sundown towns became real. That Green Book, like the movie came out, it's a real phenomena for them to try to travel. So they just didn't want to be killed as they were migrating to where the opportunities were. So let's keep going. Since the end of Reconstruction, as we've told you, white Southerners had used lynching to intimidate Black people from voting and to enforce white supremacist rule. 22, the House of Representatives had passed an anti-lynching bill, but it died in the Senate. Those Southern Democrats was like, nope, The NAACP was hopeful that FDR would support such a bill, in part because Eleanor did. We remember her from Tuskegee Airmen getting on the plane. I want to ride with him. That was a movie, but I remember that. Can you keep scrolling down, or are we good right there? I think, oh, the video?
I'll play some of the video.
The NAACP. On February 12, 1909, what is now the nation's oldest and largest grassroots civil rights organization, was formed. The NAACP, which stands for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, has been a driving force in fighting race-based discrimination in the United States since its founding.
Psych.
In 1909, racial injustices were common. Segregation was legal in many parts of the United States. Employment discrimination was common, and voting rights were often denied. People of color across the country had to live with the fear of racial violence and lynching. And so, the NAACP was formed, built on the ideals of another group, the Niagara Movement. W.E.B. Du Bois, along with 29 other prominent African Americans, started the Niagara Movement in 1905. They met near Niagara Falls and wrote a manifesto calling for equal civil rights, the end of racial discrimination, and the full recognition of humanity for people of color. In 1909, many white liberals in New York City joined with some of the Niagara Movement's Black intellectual leaders. And from that group, the NAACP was formed. In addition to W.E.B. Du Bois, other NAACP founders included renowned civil rights leaders Ida B. Wells and Mary Church Terrell. The NAACP's mission has been to achieve a fully integrated society with equal rights for all. Its national leadership has always been interracial, even though the greater membership has been mostly African American.
I can't take no more. I can't take.
Cut that malarkey off.
I can't, man. Who was the lady? The lady that they mentioned? I never heard of her though. That was kind of intriguing.
Who? Ida B. Wells?
No, not Ida B. Wells. Her,
I was finna say.
Mary Church Terrell.
I don't know. She white.
Oh, she white lady?
She looked very white to me.
Yeah, she might have been a red bone.
Yeah, that ain't no red bone.
Right, let's read this. Let's read these last. Let's just read these last what's paragraphs before we get out of here.
And it's essentially going to tell you that it gives you your same figure: 4,743 lynchings occurred in the U.S. But it still wasn't something that could push them forward. Keep going. They actually tried to pass the anti-lynching. It didn't work, but none made it through the Senate until I just brought this up in the beginning. Kamala Harris, Cory Booker, and Tim Scott sponsored the anti-lynching bills. It's still dead it passed the House. It passed the Senate, but it's dead in the House. And it still needs a signature. Now, that got to tell you something about what we're up against. If these people would rather rip the country to shreds than to stop killing Negroes and to make it illegal to lynch a Negro, there is something that's non-negotiable with them. Why are we still looking to come to the negotiating table with people who I would rather shut the entire capitalist economy down than to put on paper that we can no longer kill Negroes? And that's the mentality of people we think we need to have conversations with. I just disagree. I disagree wholeheartedly, Brother George.
Hey, bro, I'm with you. So what I'll do is this is what we'll do. I want to go here for a second, and I want to show I'm going to start at about all right. I started 1865, right? So they had 1865. They had the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to abolish slavery, and then you had acts to establish a bureau for relief of freedmen and refugees, right? And we're gonna have to come back, Moses. We're gonna have to talk about that. The act to establish the bureau for relief. What was that relief? What was that relief about?
Relief from domestic terrorism.
Yeah.
Final answer.
Right. So in 1866, here go a Civil Rights Act. 1866 guaranteed equal rights under the law for people who live within the jurisdiction of the United States. 1868 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution granted citizenships to all people born or naturalized in the United States and prohibited states from denying any person equal protection of law and depriving any person of life, liberty, and property without due process of the law. So if we get this in 1868, how did we allow Jim Crow and Plessy versus Ferguson? Let's read on. In 1870, the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution granted African American men the right to vote.
Men,
right. Now here you go, Moses. In 1870, look how every year we was in court fighting for something. Like right here, it was. I don't think that people really understand what I'm reading. Just imagine, Moses, every year, constantly every year, you worrying about getting lynched. You're fighting to get laws passed. Like you have no peace of mind, none. You have like it's just I'm reading this and I just think that people just see this as me reading something. Try to go back to the times of those people and try to go into the consciousness of those people as opposed to the consciousness that we have today. Look at as I read down, trying to think in the mindset of your great-great-grandparents. Here you go, 1870 to 1871. The Three Enforcements Act gave the federal government substantial authority to prosecute those who violated the civil rights of African Americans, especially members of the Ku Klux Klan.
Never happened.
So I'm letting people know. See, this reason why I'm doing this right here, Moses, at the end, because if we say that there was an anti-lynching bill, right, and we say that there was 4,000 black people hung in the South recorded, but we know that they had a 3/4 act that gave federal government substantial authority. Well, why the fuck did it stop in 1871? What happened? 1873, slaughterhouse cases limited the constitutional significance of the 14th Amendment privileges and immunities clause by interpreting the clause as only protecting rights of national citizenship from actions of state government. Now, this is where the fuckery comes. 1873.
They said, no, you can't do it.
Right. 1873. Bradwell versus Illinois rejected a woman's claim that the 14th Amendment required the state to allow her to practice law, and the first sex discrimination case heard by the U.S. Supreme Court. They rejected that shit. They told her, man, get the fuck out of here. We ain't trying to hear this shit. This is a white, male, patriarchal, dominant society. So here we go, another civil rights bill, 1875. Civil Rights Act of 1875 guaranteed African Americans equal treatment in public accommodations, transportation, and prohibited their exercise for jury service. But I thought that the civil rights hold on, wait, which one? I'll read on.
1875, sir.
Yeah. And so now let's go to 1883. In 1883, civil rights cases heard by the U.S. Supreme Court declared parts of the 1875 Civil Rights Act unconstitutional, including the prohibition of racial discrimination in inns, public conveniences, and places of public amusement. Now, this is where the state started to separate from state and federal, because they said, man, fuck your federal law. This is Alabama. This is Mississippi. This is Georgia. We don't give a fuck about your federal law. This is South Carolina. We got our own state law that we're going to enact. It ain't got nothing. Y'all ain't got no jurisdiction over this shit. So this is where the bullshit comes. Then you have 1896, Plessy versus Ferguson. Louisiana, I forgot Louisiana. Louisiana upheld the constitutionality of Louisiana statute that required railroads to provide equal but separate accommodations for the white and colored races. But wait a minute. Under the amendments, it wasn't supposed to be none of this, but the state got their own laws. They can do what they want. That's we ain't got nothing to do with you federal motherfuckers. We're going to do our own shit. Now, the federal government, from what we read, Moses, never wanted to override the Democratic South because they didn't want to break up the Union, right?
Right.
So they allowed this to go on. They knew what the Democratic South was doing to the blacks there, but in order to keep the Union intact after the war, they said, man, fuck that. Man, y'all can do what y'all want to do. Y'all can do what y'all want to do. We're not going to intervene. We're not going to intervene. So then you have the segregation era. So then you come up to 1903.
Oh wait, I got to drop in a note right there. Tim Scott, who did the anti-lynching bill and the opportunity zones, he is the only African American senator in South Carolina since 1881. Since that era right there of Black Republicans. Keep going.
Right. So now this is where your state law supersedes the so-called federal law, and the federal government was complicit because they did nothing about it. They basically told Negroes, man, listen, we understand what's going on with you. We know you fought in every war. We understand, but listen, fuck that. We got our own thing going on. You're gonna have to hold this L for a minute. But this right there, this what I'm reading strengthens our case for reparations, or if we understand how this thing operates. Giles versus Harry, Alabama, refused to order the board of registers to register an African American to vote, in part because the court concluded that unless it could actually supervise elections, it was unable to force white Alabamans to allow African Americans to vote.
Hey, that is dumb funny. I mean, it's not, but I got to read it one more time. They refused to order the board of registrars to register an African American to vote, in part because the court concluded, the judge said, that unless it could actually supervise elections, it was unable to force white Alabamans to allow African Americans to. If they can't force Alabama, they said, look, if we can't be there, then we can't force them to do anything.
Here you go. Here go one. 1906. Hodges versus. I'm not going to read all of these. I'm going to read some of them as I go down the line. I'm going to read the most important ones. 1906. Hodges versus the United States. Arkansas reversed a conviction against whites who had ejected citizens of the United States of African descent from their jobs. The decision narrowed the Congressional Civil Rights Authority under the 13th Amendment. Let's see. Okay, here we go. 1911. Belly versus State of Alabama invalidated, based on the 13th Amendment, a law that facilitated debt bondage, a form of involuntary servitude. Let me see. Hold on. As we go down, because I want to get up to the amendments. Let me come down, because all this is okay. Here we go. 1927, Nixon versus Herron. Texas struck down in 1923 Texas law that prohibited blacks from voting in the Democratic Party primary. 1932, Nixon versus Codon. Texas declared that prohibition of African Americans from the Democratic primaries by executive committee was unconstitutional. 1935, Grovey versus Townsend. Texas ruled that the members of the Democratic Party of Texas who assembled at a convention and made resolutions about those qualified to vote in the Democratic primary were a private group, and that barring all but white citizens was not an act of the state, and therefore not a violation of the 14th Amendment. They was getting away with getting away with everything, and the government was complicit in it. So let's go down to 1939. 1930. See, I got to read all of this because this is important. 1939, and I got to read all this because I see a lot of people, Moses, they have 8, 7 hour live streams. People be on them joints all night, right? So now we've been on here for a little more than 2 hours, bringing forth information. But this is information that's more important than us just talking shit for 7 hours.
This is straight facts.
1939, creation of the Civil Liberties Unit, later named the Civil Rights Section of the Department of Justice, the first federal entity tasked with the protection of civil rights since Reconstruction. Well, wait a fucking minute. They pulled the troops out in 1877. What took them so long?
Hey, it's slow, man. Congress is slow, man.
So 1941 to 1945, Executive Order 8802 prohibited racial discrimination in the national defense industry in response to the attended First March on Washington Roosevelt. 1942, Executive Order 9066 designated much of the West Coast military area in order more than that's insignificant. Let me go there. Hold on. Overturned Democratic Party use of
I think you missed the National Housing Act of 1934, which established the Federal Housing Administration. We got to throw that 1934 in there on them, just in case we may have missed it. Yeah, they missed it too, though. But this is about how they created the ghettos. Of course, they're gonna leave that one off.
Yeah, that's not in there. I actually, it's funny that you said that because I was looking for that.
Oh yes, the Civil Rights Act that comes up in the 60s. The 1968, the Fair Housing Act is finally passed. What's taking so long? You done gave away all these millions and hundreds of millions of acres of land and did everything to give this land away. But now in the 1930s, you finally get a federal government to start regulating some of it. Why do they need the regulations now? Because they complicit.
Here you go. Look at this one, though. Look at this one. In 1948, Executive Order 9981 abolished racial discrimination in armed forces. All the way from 1948. Now, my grandparents fought in every war.
Yep.
They fought in every war, but they experienced all kinds of bullshit. So let's go here. Let's get up to the 50s as we now we're coming up to the part that most of us are more familiar with. Okay. 1951 Executive Order 10,308 created a committee on government compliance to enforce the prohibition against employment discrimination by firms contracting and subcontracting government orders. Man, we don't understand how important that was. See, this order right here, Moses, is what was one of the ones that was complicit in keeping us out of economic wealth. There was discrimination in different contracts and subcontracting. We wasn't able to acquire that type of wealth. We was kept out of that shit. So now you had to have an executive order put in place where you already have federal laws that was on the books that was supposed to protect us from that. But they allow state laws to do their thing. 1953, Executive Order 10,479 created the Government Contract Committee. Oh, wait a fucking minute. You just created the law. You just created the what? See, I'm laughing because I'm showing just the fuckery that they was doing. In 1941, you had the Executive Order 10,038 created a committee on government compliance to enforce prohibition against employment discrimination by firms contracting and subcontracting government orders. Then in 1953, you got Executive Order 10,479 created the Government Contract Committee to replace the Committee on the Government Compliance. So they created another committee to replace that committee. But they was just pushing the goalpost back every single time. The more and more pressure that we put on them, the more and more pressure, the more and more they was backpedaling. The more and more we push forward, the more and more they backpedal. 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, held that the public education and segregation of children in public schools solely on the basis of race, even through the physical facilities and other tangible factors, were equal. Deprive equal education opportunities to children of the minority group. 1955, Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas, too, stated that the Southern schools should comply. With Brown 1 with all deliberate speed, which white Southerners understood as allowing them to resist only symbolically comply with school desegregation. But this is around the time when America started to become a superpower. Because you got to understand something. America became a superpower after World War I, after the League of Nations was disbanded. When they joined the war, because remember, they joined World War I from 1917 to 1918. But in joining that war, America became known as a superpower, and they had their footing in the door where now, as time went on, they was able to basically start moving and shaking. So as you start getting up to the 50s, you start seeing, after the Second World War, you start basically seeing the Northerners basically tell the Southerners, fuck you, do what we say.
But Brother George, we got to keep it economic, though. Even the 1919s, 20s, the first war, and then the second war, you mean African-American businesses couldn't get no contracts to all this government spending they was doing?
Oh, hell no.
Ships and boats and planes and trains, and we couldn't get none of that?
No, Are you serious? Like,
My granddad couldn't get none of that.
See, this is the problem. You niggas is asking for too much. We already got you up to the north from Plessy versus Ferguson and Jim Crow. Now you asking for contract jobs? You asking to be part of the fucking contract and subcontracting committees? Like, you ungrateful Negroes.
My great grandma was good with cotton. She could have sold up some uniforms or something, some boots. She couldn't make no boots.
But Moses, we gave you the 1957 Civil Rights Act after the 1,000 acts that we already gave you, which established the Civil Rights Commission, the CRC, to protect individual rights to equal protection. But wait a minute, I thought that the Civil Rights Act of 1875 did that. But we gave you the equal protection and protected some civil rights and voting rights, but it lacked substantial enforcement mechanisms. So we had to come back. So we even came back 3 years later and set you ungrateful Negroes down and gave you the Civil Rights Act of 1960. And you still want more? What's wrong with you, Moses? What's wrong with you people?
I need you to vote again. It's coming back around, baby. I need you to vote one more time. Vote it. I got you. I'm going to put it on the ballot.
We gave you the Civil Rights Act of 1966 that guaranteed qualified voters the right to register to vote in any state. But wait a minute, I thought they gave us the right to vote in 1870.
You got to scroll down. I can't even follow you no more, man. You're going too fast, man. I think they think it's satire, but I'm so mad. You got to laugh about it, Brother George.
I thought we was given the right to vote in the 1870s, but in 1960, damn near 90 years freaking later, we still getting the Civil Rights Act bill for vote. So let's go to 1961, a year later. See, because listen, Monica, look, our grandparents and great-grandparents and great-grandparents never had peace of mind. Look at the years: 55, 57, 60, 61, 61, 62, 63. Right, we was constantly fighting to get certain shit. Now here we go. 1961, Executive Order 10,925 created another committee on equal opportunity. I thought the Civil Rights Act of 1957 handled that. An equal opportunity to combat discrimination in government employment and the private employment stemming from government contracts. Whoa. Let's go back. Hold on, Moses. Let's go back.
Equal protection under the law.
Wasn't the 1950 executive order created a government committee to replace the committee of compliance that in 1950 was supposed to protect us for government contracting and subcontracting government orders? So why in 1961 are we back at the table again trying to help get government contracts? Now, the reason why I'm doing this, Monica, because see, this is the part I think that we lose here. When we talk about government contracts, and Monica Lamb and I'm talking about government contracts today.
Yes.
We was kept out of that economic loop and that generational wealth of acquiring wealth because they systematically kept us out of the contracting and subcontracting and getting government contracts to hire and employ your own people, to acquire generational wealth and to employ people where they can live off. Come on, man. Yeah.
Man, you can watch Monica Lamb's videos. Just watch a couple of them. You can go all the way back to the website you need to go to. She can go all the way to the application. She's probably giving you verbiage on what you need to put on that application, but she can't fill it out for you for free.
Yeah, subscribe. I don't got the link for Monica. I put a link in the chat room. Subscribe to Monica Lamb, man. She go in on this. And Monica Lamb has the ability to take advantage of the privileges that we have now based off of the fight that our ancestors fought for. So I don't want anybody ever part their freaking lips to say that our ancestors dropped the ball. You are a goddamn disgrace and you don't know what the fuck you talking about. If you out here running your mouth saying our ancestors dropped the ball, you don't have a fucking clue what our people was fighting constantly. And at the same time, through all these years we fighting, we're still being hung. We're still being redlined. We're still being kept out of economic loop. They're still putting heroin in your community now and booze and all kinds of shit into your communities. Like, we don't, man, please. Man, don't you dare ever part your lips to say that the ancestors before us dropped the ball. And y'all don't know anything about this shit that I'm reading now.
Brother George, how were the ghettos created, sir?
You know how they was created.
This is how the ghettos are created, man. It's right here in plain language, man. If they want to read, they can come read with us. Whenever they want to join the panel, they can come on and read some of these articles and put the facts in the air, because it's too many other conversations around absolutely nothing. Like the opinions, I'd be like, I know some of y'all read. You've read some good books, but if you don't even want to read good books, the information is there. Who said it probably best? I think it was probably the young dude, young Pharaoh, when he didn't know something. He was like, I don't know, Google it.
Here you go, Moses, right here. Here you go. Monroe versus Pate. The revitalized section 1983 of the Civil Rights Act of 1871. See, this is all these civil rights acts by allowing individuals to sue government actors for a violation of civil rights. 1962, Executive Order 11,063 banned racial discrimination in federally funded housing. Now, this is coming up to your Unfair Housing Act, but we were fighting that and the redlining all the way up until the 1968. Once was 67 when they finally abolished it. 1963, Equal Pay Act required employers to pay all employees equally for equal work, regardless of whether the employees are male or female. We still have that problem to this day. 1963, again, Executive Order 11,114 extended guarantees against employment discrimination to federally assist contracts in the construction industry. Oh my God. If you go back to the early 70s, you see some of the fights that they would have when they crossed the line of the protests they was having. Now
so they finally said we can get into that construction industry, huh?
Yeah. But we got to come in as workers, though. 1964, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination in public accommodations and employment, authorized the Attorney General to bring school desegregation suits. And wait a minute. I thought that the Board of Education in 1955 did that. Why in 1964 we still revisiting this thing? What's the problem?
Because it was at their pace.
They do it. They move at a snail's pace, right?
Absolutely.
Bring federal government to withdraw funds from schools and other governmental entities receiving federal funds if they discriminated, and provided enhanced enforcement mechanisms for protecting civil rights and voting rights. Now, another thing that we got to understand too, Moses, is when they redlined us into those ghettos and they kept us out of home ownership.
Yep.
And they kept us out of being able to pay for homes and taxes. This is one of the reasons why we had inadequate schools, because your property tax pays for your schools, your schoolings, and your property tax also pays for your streets and different things. And state government also comes and do certain things, but home ownership helps basically build the communities you live in. That's why when you go to if I live in Southwest, they don't want me. If I live in Philadelphia, they don't want me sending my kids out to a county that I don't pay taxes in, because I'm not putting into the pot. But so that's another part that's been widely left out when they redline us into these ghettos and we're out of the loop of ownership. Now we have no say so, we have no power.
Man, my grandmother had a 3rd grade education. You know where she went to school? On Sundays. It was called Sunday school.
1964, 24th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution eliminated poll taxes in federal elections. Now we at 1965. Look at all this shit in 1965. 1965, Voting Rights Act of 1965 enforced the 15th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to provide for substantial federal supervision of voting and election procedures in order to eliminate the racial discrimination and protect the rights to vote. 1965, Older Americans Act of 1965 provided assistance in the development of new or improved programs to help older persons through grants to the state for community planning and services for training through research, development, and training project grants, and to establish within the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare and operating agencies to be designed at the Administration of Aging. 1965 again, Medicare Act provided a housing insurance program for the age under the Social Security Act with I can't even read today. Supplementary medical benefits program an extended program of medical assistance to increase benefits under the older age survivors. And then you have I'll skip that one.
Voc rehab.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. If you get hurt and you need some assistance getting back into the workforce or retraining, that became another program. So they just expanded it.
What's going on, Booker Two-Tone? We got the 1965. We had the Executive Order 11,246 authorized federal agencies to enforce the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Well, how do you have to have another act to force the federal government to enforce the Civil Rights Act? Now, what does that mean? Why, George, why are you saying this? Because the federal authorities were complicit with racism. They were racist themselves. They were the freaking Klan. The damn federal government, the CIA, all these different groups. 1966, Harper versus Virginia Board of Elections found Virginia's poll tax unconstitutional under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, making poll tax illegal for the state. Here you go again, Moses. 1966, Executive Order 11,375 added six sex discriminations to the enforcement of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 as required by Executive Order 11,246 Johnson. Then you come to 1967. This is the Age Discrimination and Employment Act of 1967, prohibited arbitrary age discrimination in employment and help employers and workers find ways in meeting problems arising in the impact of age employment. So then you got, this is where they started to abolish the redlining. 1967, 1960. Hold on. Okay, 1968 Civil Rights Act of 1968 provided for equal housing opportunities regardless of race, creed, or national origin, and made it a federal crime to injure or intimidate anyone because of their race, color, region, or national origin. Well, this is the question I had, Monica Lamb. How come we still live in segregated cities? What they did from 1932 to 1968 still affects us today. And this is the reason why we're failing in capitalism, because the majority of us have no home ownership. We own nothing within the communities that we live in. We don't even own the communities. We're guests in communities that we live in, because the federal government under FDR was complicit in creating these unfair tactics on what they did. And then they tried to abolish it in 1968, but it still went on. And still to this day, in certain neighborhoods, your car break down and you walk down the street, you can get pulled over or shot. If your car break down and you go knock on somebody's door for help, you can get shot like that black boy a couple weeks ago.
Hey, you're gonna have to let me go in on this 1968, man.
Go ahead, bro.
Now I'm gonna need the whole screen share and everything. So let's finish out. Let's run through the some more of these, and then I'm gonna need a couple of minutes just to hit them with some real heavy 1968.
Yeah, we almost done. We almost done. I'm gonna do about 5 more, and then we'll just go to 68, and then we get out of here. Here we go. Okay, here we go. 1968, Jones versus Alfred H. Mayer and Company. Missouri prohibited purely private discrimination in the sale or rental of property. 1968, Green versus the County Board of New Kent County, Virginia, reversed the decision of the Virginia Court of Appeals that supported separate schools from whites and blacks. And you got to remember, Virginia is the place of Walter Plecker. Right? Virginia was super racist. 1969, Executive Order 11,478 required equal opportunity and affirmative action programs in all federal agencies under Richard Nixon. 1972, the Equal Opportunity Act amended the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to apply to local, state, and federal governments to allow Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to bring suits itself. Then you have the 1973 Vocational Rehabilitation Act of 1973, prohibited discrimination on basis of disability in federal programs, federal contractor programs, reviving federal money and federal employment. So I'll do 2 more. Let's see. Let's come down to some more recent ones. Let's go with don't. Look at this shit here. 2010. Don't Ask, Don't Tell, Repeal Act of 2010 allow openly gay, lesbian, and bisexual Americans to serve without discrimination in the armed forces. They was already in the fucking armed forces. They just allowed them just to come out with it. Now they swinging from the chandeliers in the goddamn Navy on the boat. Stranded at sea for 6 months, a bunch of fucking men all day. Yeah, I bet. You can only imagine what the fuck they doing out there and shit. Shipwrecked. Men at sea 14 and shit. All right, here we go. Go ahead. But I'm gonna stop right there. But I'll go up. Where people can actually see what this article was, and y'all can. This is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, a long struggle to freedom. Y'all can actually take look this up. Monica, you can look this up, and you can get all this down. So you can see it up at the top. The Civil Rights Act, the long struggle to freedom. Here on the screen. Yeah, read it. Because we have folks. Yeah, we do. White women engaged enter the picture soon, and affirmative action because of diversity. Where you at, Moses? You want to share the screen?
Absolutely.
All right, let me stop sharing so you can share.
So appreciate while we make this quick transition. Janice Lewis, she said, hit that like button. Hit that like button, man. George on the panel was showing us blacks how it has been systematic. So we got to keep having these conversations around the system because we got a lot of people talking about that personal accountability. And the more we can talk about personal accountability, the more we can talk about the collective responsibility. The collective responsibility is what we're going to need. The personal accountability is an individual thing. So it feels good to know that I am personally accountable, but it feels even better when I know that my personal accountability can be matched with my brother George's personal accountability. We come together as collective. He got hard information that he's hitting with. I got about 5 minutes on my soapbox and I'm gonna be done. But I did a little bit of additional information that I would like to provide as well. It starts off in that 1964. If I can share my screen, Brother George, with your permission.
Yeah, go ahead, bro.
All right, so let me select that and press share. Let me know, can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, so I just got a couple of pieces of information, quite more than a couple, but we're gonna run these things for you in the manner that I found them. 1964, we know what was going on, right? Martin Luther King, my Morehouse brother, he's getting the president's ear. He got the, the whole SNCC movement, the white people in the NAACP, they doing their legal battles. Who is it? Thurgood Marshall is our dude. I mean, things are starting to look good. Religious groups, labor unions, civil rights organizations are mounting an intense grassroots efforts. So you got African Americans all over this nation that are coming together. What was it, like the Deacons for Defense? Who else? The Nation of Islam, Brother Malcolm X. I mean, you got people that are moving. You got people that ain't just YouTube famous. They really going in on these streets. And that's what we needed because they had a big opposition. George Wallace, the segregationalist governor of Alabama, made a strong showing in the 64 presidential primaries. His campaign relied on anti-integration rhetoric, talking about it's going to be against the traditional American values. That's interesting. The traditional American values. Can you please describe those to us for us? Not right now, but we're going to need him to describe that. All right, so they marching and protesting. He got the kids, he got the women, he got men, he got people with their lunch pails and flags, and they doing what they need to do. They getting out there, right? From Selma, Montgomery to Alabama, they making that march happen. The vicious beatings happen. Don't forget Bloody Sunday. We got to throw that in there right there on Edmund Pettus Bridge. Don't forget about it because it is one of those real life situations where if you go out there and you want to protest another black body that's been needlessly taken away from us by a police officer, sometimes they're the anti-protesters that are out there and they're willing to do some damage. Just like on Bloody Sunday, they came out there with their bats. They were sanctioned by the police. The police was out there. They were spraying them with water hoses, had the attack dogs. They put them on us. But we keep fighting. Voting Rights 65 got the president to come, and man, we're going to need you to sign this bill. We're going to keep moving though. The thing that I really wanted to bring together here though is let me close this one. In 1968, what happens? About a week after Martin Luther King Jr. is assassinated, he finally signs that bill. And that bill is going to be the one that actually starts to set some precedent for the Fair Housing Act. The Fair Housing Act is instrumental, right? It's based on cases and outcomes. And I had to do a little bit of extra research from my brother George, man. I had to, because when it comes to the redlining is still alive and it is very well and evolving even today. It is one of those practices that are seldom talked about, but it goes to everything, to where they'll deliver pizzas sometimes. But it's really about your ability to create intergenerational wealth by ownership. It's about the interest rates that they're going to charge you for the homes inside of your neighborhood. But if you move to the zip code that's two zip codes away, the interest rates that you would get there. That FICO score, or that credit rating, it's one of the things that has been detrimental to African-American wealth creation. And we know it to be true, and we know it to be something that really hurts to this day. The United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Oh, let me go to this one. So this is the actual policy, or the Fair Housing Act itself. Brother Cornell, who went to Cornell? Sonetta TV priest Jabari graduated from Cornell, and so just remembering that name gave me the impetus to keep looking in on it. The thing that we kept running into, what we were reading, is that they didn't have enforcement mechanisms. Who would actually enforce? The secretary, the attorney general, private persons? In many of our cases, Eric Holder has not been somebody who was going to enforce any of this stuff on our behalf. And that's what I want to show you. So there are patterns of discrimination that have been put out there, and there are cases that have been put out there. But our leadership that goes all the way up to that chain of command, who was supposed to be doing the enforcement, dropped the ball on us. And so I'm going to close it out. I showed you where it is. Data.gov is where we can find it. These are the credible sources that we use when we're doing additional research. Got the PDF myself. There are 8 recent cases that they look at. And for whatever reason that they pulled out, I'm not going to go through it, but that's Brenton Mock. You can see the date here up to 2015. Something that I found that was interesting about the FICO scores, but in the early days of contemporary credit, they didn't have many credit bureaus. And a rep would call or visit stores asking about a person. Were they paying their bills? It was quantitative, but not exact. They would ask a merchant, does he pay his bills on time? They would say, yes, they pay him on time. Oh, yeah, and they like cigars. But it was character-based decision-making. Now, these are the systems that were based on character, going into the markets to people who were actually paying their bills or extended lines of credit. And that's how they were able to establish good credit. And they would get little index cards and take those index cards and put them in a system. And those systems were sold as a part of early age credit bureaus. And that's the premise of FICO. It's social and character-based. And this is why it's going to be important. Because in those 1950s, when we're trying to get all of these bills passed, they continued to refine that system using technology. It was still those cards. They sold their credit scoring idea to banks and retailers in the United States and around the world. The Fair Credit Reporting Act passed in 1970. So after 100 years of free land and homestead acts, they finally decided that they needed a Fair Credit Reporting Act, but it was still based off character-based decision-making. Those little cards of, does John pay his bills on time? Yes, and John likes cigars. Credit bureaus themselves are interesting history. It started off as a retail credit company in 1899 in Atlanta. That was Equifax. Experian is the newer one. TRW Information Services, which was a large credit bureau in the 70s and 80s. One would say, let me pull their TRW. It was a part of defense. And we know that they didn't give rights for African Americans to even serve equally with them until the 50s. TransUnion began as a railroad car leasing company. It acquired Credit Bureau in 1969. Without computers, data was stored on index cards. TransUnion purchased more than 3.6 million index cards based off of, does John pay his bills on time? Yes, and he likes cigars. And that is what started it off, social and character-based. So it was a legacy of discrimination and racism that has FICO scores. This is why we have a disparate impact when it comes to credit. I'm going to say that one more time. This is why we have a disparate impact when it comes to credit. Now, let me show you, because I can show you better than I can tell you. Young Mo does research. So I showed you, we got the raw data from the source, calendar year 2000 to 2015, Attorney General Eric Holder and all of those. By state, what is the information that it's going to show us? So the year it was filed, the state where the violation occurred, the number of cases that were filed, the number of cases that were filed that were based on race, the number of cases that were Asian and white, Black or African American, the number that were filed that were Black or Black and white. They don't have the data here, as you see, all that race mixing stuff that we think we so swirling, but we're not getting it here on these type of claims. But let me show you the one that really is significant to me. I'm gonna scoot it over and then I'm gonna go to my condensed version. So they had disabilities. These are all the protected classes: familial status, religion, sex, retaliation. This is important, Brother George. The number of charges. So you got the attorney general or the secretary of the state or whoever it is who can file charges against those banking institutions or whoever's discriminating. But we're going to look at this from black and white, and we're going to look at the number of charges that were actually prosecuted. All right. Can I do that for you, Brother George, just to show them that we do research around here?
Yes, sir.
All right, so let's do it. I took that same data, I consolidated for us just to make this easier on the eyes. I took off all the states because it's irrelevant. If you want that information, go look it up. But it's right here. I showed you. This is the raw data from the source. You see all the different states are listed. Goes all the way down to a total. I'll give you my methodology. Here is the total for 2020. So you see that I'm keeping it 100. My summary: 7,116 cases, raw data, 7,116 cases. Let's move forward. I want to know if they're race-based. That was 2,792 cases in 2000. This is the year that I graduated from high school, and we're still dealing with race-based discrimination when it comes to housing. Housing and employment. How many were black? Out of those race-based cases, look, Brother George, 2,576, that is 92% of the race-based discrimination or Fair Housing Act cases were black. White, 215 is only about 8%, and the number is actually less than that. But you know, when you, let me do it this way so they can see it. When you're doing those percentages, 7.7%, and then all others is even less. They're not working with us as other minority groups towards fighting against the housing discrimination. They don't face those kind of problems. As you see here, it's just black folks. The number of charges filed, 54 out of 7,116 cases. Look, man, I'll even show you my formulas in a formula bar if you want to test my methodology. The percentage of those charges that were actually filed, 8.8%, not even 1%, Brother George. Not 1% of charges brought up against them for all of this 7,000 Fair Housing Act cases of discrimination based on race. 2,792, 2,576 of those were African American discrimination cases, but it was less than 1% of charges brought.
Right. Yeah.
And you can look down at the numbers and look as they grow and then look as they fall off.
But real quick, Mose, let me throw this part in there while you going in. 30 seconds. This is why I tell Black YouTube, when you're on these platforms and you're hearing people talk and they talking like they're more intelligent than everybody else, you gotta check the receipts. You gotta really see what happened to our people. So now when you ask the question, why are we so fucked up, or black on black violence? Well, black on black violence is a direct result of white racism and what they did to our people yesterday. It affects you now. Black on black violence is no different than white on white violence when you have oppression and economic and poor economics. And we just basically broke down what happened to our people and the continuous fight. Our people, so don't get caught up in this shit where they talk about, I'm tired of niggas killing each other and you niggas this and you. Well, any group that's forced through generations of economic and not being able to compete in the capitalist society are going to behave the way that you see Negroes behave. It's just part of this. It's part of the way the society is designed. Because for every nigga that's acting up, guess what? In the system of capitalism, somebody's benefiting off of. For every woman that's getting an abortion, the state and the government get money off of it. For every nigga that's killing each other, the state and the government is getting money off of it. For every dysfunction that the black community has, the state and government is getting the money off of it. They got the game checkmated based off of what they did to your grandparents. So don't get caught up in this black on black crime bullshit. This is systematically done in the capitalist society to make money. Go ahead, Moses.
I don't like just the vent. I be on that soapbox, man, but it's 152,000 cases over that 16-year period since I graduated high school. My parents weren't able to leave me with no house or nothing like that. No intergenerational wealth. They couldn't even afford to pay my rent for a month, let alone to leave me with a house. 152,000 cases, 51,000 filed by, 51,000 that are race-based, 43,000 that were African Americans, 4,000 that were white. 83% on average were African Americans or that were black. 623 charges brought over that 16-year period. Only 623. It's still less than 1%. So I'm going to give you the solution. Right now, we still need a solution that's able to process discrimination claims even as they come in, because our attorney general in his office is understaffed and they don't have the technology or the resources to be able to streamline these processes, to streamline the process of filing these claims and bringing about real charges. They're not investigating. They're not doing anything. If you get discriminated on your job, what happens? Oh, we'll just ask your manager what happened. And they may let you know, oh, we investigated and we decided that, we're not going to take an action, or they'll be written up. But they're not getting the people who are discriminating out of power. This is not punitive damages being assessed. This is not managers at banks being fired and going to jail. This is not $100,000 per penalty. This is not what we're getting here to actually change the system. So the system is the way it is because there is no penalty against discrimination in housing. They are still not able to enforce it, and they're still doing a piss poor job of appointing leadership who have the passion to make the changes that need to happen. As you see here, the number of total cases is high. Every year it's high, more than 8,000 cases, going all the way up to 10, even in the housing. When the housing boom happened, or the housing, whatever happened in the real estate market, race-based is still up there. Right there with the race-based is African Americans. Look at it. You see the numbers are running in parallel. Whites, flat. Charges, flat. So that's not changing. There will be a small number of whites who feel discriminated against, and there's only a very small percentage of charges that are brought. But when it comes to race-based and African Americans saying, look, I've been discriminated against here in America, our systems are still not ready to deal with its ugly past. Redlining is present. It's still hurting folks. Discrimination is still out there, and there's nothing that our leaders are able to do about it. And if they would ever listen to some brothers on YouTube like Brother George or Brother Moses, they might have the information, the fuel that they need, the receipts to affect change. I think it's affect, AFFECT. They would have the tools they need to affect change because we've given them the receipts. We've given them the ancestors. We speak our ancestors' names. We've given them the court cases. We've given them the jobs and the job opportunities that we were denied. We gave them the land grants. Next thing, why should we have to be the ones to actually give you the names of the businesses that benefited from slavery when you know it already? Why should we have to vote on HR 40 to get another committee or a coalition when we see over time committees and coalitions are not what are affecting change? But if that's what we got to do is to keep playing this game, then let's play, Brother George. Peace and blessing to everybody that joined us during the live stream. My name is Brother Moses, here to support my big bro, man. It's been one of those, man, in powerful builds, I would say. Save it, share it with a friend, save it to your playlist. Share it with somebody just for the sake of sharing it so that the number of shares goes up. Like it. Tell the people that you shared it to, even if they can't watch all 3 hours, just to like it. Tell them to watch some of it. Let them know what's in there, and it can be useful for them in their journey. Brother George, appreciate you, man.
Yeah, no doubt. We got to get you got to stop sharing, I think you're still sharing.
Did it stop right now?
No, you gotta hit the stop sharing blue button in the middle. There you go.
I don't got it. This one.
Yeah, there you go. Nah, there you go. Now, yeah. And I'm glad that we got Monica in the chat room, because everything we talked about government contracts and all the different things. She's a person in the chat room now that's had the ability to take advantage of what our ancestors was fighting for. Hopefully in the future I can get Monica to come onto the channel and actually talk about government contracts and the things that our people that's available to our people today that a lot of us don't know how to capitalize on. Um, our ancestors was fighting to get these things done, to be able to create generational wealth and create jobs for our people, and we was kept out of that loop. So we fought to get certain bills passed. So we had the privilege to have a sister in the chat room that actually has the knowledge of this. So we need to be pushing forward this kind of stuff. People with skill sets that actually knows how to get to the money and create economics for our people, because there's our grandparents and great grandparents, they left a lot of things on the books that we could take advantage of now, man. Don't ever say that they dropped the ball. Don't you ever part your lips to say that they dropped the ball. You don't have a clue. When I hear people say that our ancestors dropped the ball, that right, I cut them off, because it lets me know that they're not that smart. They don't know history. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. Our grandparents are some of the greatest generations we'll ever know. If if 500 years from now in history, and they was looking back in history and they look back into our time, our grandparents' times, the time of slavery, and then ancient times, what would they say about us? What are we producing today? What where's our Martin Delaney? Where's our Henry McNeil Turner? Where's our Shirley Chisholm, Mary Bethune McLeod? What are we doing today? Where we could be put into the pantheon of glory amongst black people, but we got the nerve to say that our ancestors dropped the ball. Where's your Marcus Garvey? Where's our Elijah Muhammad? This is the stuff that we got to really think about. We got the ability to produce and create today going forward, because they laid down an amazing platform. They sacrificed, they shed blood, they were hung, they had dogs sicked on them. They endured all kinds of. Black women was raped, black men were raped. We was kept out of the economic loop. We were redlined. We were anything that you can ever think of. We experienced hell on earth. In order for us to be here now, to walk into the future, to create and manifest things now. So don't you ever say that the people before you dropped the ball. Just the decision that they made to live is the reason why your black ass is here now. The reason that they decided to endure punishment and pain, so that way they can live, so you could be born today. So don't you ever say they dropped the ball. You have the opportunity to fix it, and we have to get to our black people that have skill sets. My brother Moses has a good dynamic skill set. Monica has a skill set. It's so many people with skill sets that once we understand certain things that's afforded to black people, we got to take advantage of it. So I'm glad that you guys came in and they grabbed it. Booker T. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, whether you like him or not. Like, we had so many greats. Paul Robeson. I mean, I can go on and on and on and on and on. Who do we have for today? Who is our Martin Luther? Where's our Malcolm X? So while we talking about the ancestors dropped the ball, we're manifesting and producing nothing going forward when they laid the groundwork for us. So I just I want to thank everybody for coming out, man, for this 3 hours, man, that we laid this information down. Hopefully we can have a part 2 to this, where we can have some other skill set brothers come in and add on to what we did, because I think that it's necessary. I'm definitely going to try set up something with Monica, where Monica can come on and she can talk about government contracts and how we can begin to get into that and at least get knowledge of it. There's a lot of things that's afforded to us, Brother Moses, that our people don't know about. So we sit and we wallow in our misery where there's things afforded to us. And guess who's coming to get it? Other immigrant groups is coming in and getting it under being people of color, where they have things set in place for us. We just got to get the knowledge. So remember, I love my people more than they hate. Now, matter of fact, you want to say something, Moses? You want to close out? You want to close out?
Peace to the chat. Peace to everyone. Thanks for joining us in this 3-hour stream. Some of this information you might think may not be for you. It may be for somebody else. You may just be the conduit of this message. So Thank you for joining us, and thank you for making yourself available to have some of this information come to you. Hopefully, it was edifying as well as entertaining, because I think we brought it. And if you agree, then salute us with a chat or a like, and let us know how you feel. Thanks, Brother George.
Yeah. Donald Will said follow stock trading videos on his channel. I'm gonna have to bring you on, Donald Will. We could talk about stock and trading. We have to bring forth this kind of information to bring it out to our people. There's a lot of fuckery on Black YouTube, but it's not a lot of information being traded back and forth to actually teach our people. And I'm telling you, I'm kind of glad that it's not 700 people. It should be 700 people in the chat room. I would be happy if it was, but I'm kind of glad because the 46 people that stayed the whole time and watched is the people that's really like your core audience, people that's really interested in making a change in their life, wanting to do better, wanting to be better, understanding the way that we're being attacked, the tactics that they're using still to this day. So like I said, I'm gonna put, matter of fact, let me put my email in the chat with Monica and Will can actually get with me, and you guys can come on and we can start having these conversations because it's necessary. These conversations are very important and necessary to have. So Donald Will, that's my email. I know Monica. I think I know you already got mine, but Monica is a wealth of information. A lot of our sisters, man, you'd be surprised. A lot of our sisters, man, got all kinds of education and a wealth of information. We have to collaborate. You know, I'm good at bringing information out to the table, but I don't have certain skill sets that I do got some skill sets, but I don't have some of the skill sets that these my great family, my family has. So remember, I love my people more than they hate themselves. And I pray to the universal creator most high that these words are enough to inspire you. These words are enough to make you look at yourself in the mirror and make change. These words are enough to make you look at your children and know you have to make change. I hope that when you came here for information. And when you leave here better than what you was before you came. I hope you leave here edified. I hope that you share this to with your family members. You sit down and at the barbershop, at the water cooler, at the job, on your break, in the car, you play it, in the house with the children. Like, just play this information and let people understand and let the youth know we wasn't born with one chromosome missing. We're not blubbering idiots. We're not fools. What happened to us was intentionally and systematic in the capitalist society. In the capitalist society, somebody has to be the food for all the other groups. And us being the descendants of slaves that they can't kick out the country and send anywhere else, they assimilated us and sentenced us to a lifetime of consumption. And it's our job to figure out a way to how to get out of it. And we showed you year by year by year by year, and how the federal government and state and local government was complicit in keeping the Negro man and woman in a state of economic deprivation, just downtrodden. And what happened yesterday affects you today. And I ain't talking about something that happened in the 1700s. I'm talking about the 1930s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. That's still affecting you today. We've never got out of so-called slavery. They took the chains off of our arms, but they didn't take them off our minds. And this is the thing that we got to recognize and realize. So remember, I love y'all, man. I want to really thank y'all for sitting in for 3 hours, man, and watching this information, man. So remember, man, to the next time, peace.